I wanted to share a story from my childhood with y'all. I've changed all the names for privacy reasons. I'm the youngest in my family, and I've just turned 17. All my siblings are married, and really older than me. So all my childhood, I've spent alone in my Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jared's house. Uncle Jared is my dad's older brother. My parents both work, and weren't home most of the time. I've always gotten a really heavy feeling when I was in their house and experienced really questionable things. One of the things I vividly remember is seeing a silhouette of a tall man in a coat and hat. He was standing at the end of their hall, just facing in my direction. It was kind of like a shadow, but he didn't move at all. Whenever I slept over there, I have my own room at their house, I would hear furniture moving upstairs, and all the bedrooms are downstairs on the first floor. The kitchen is on the ground floor. The second floor only has a big lounge type area for parties, and it's always locked, so I know for a fact that no one goes there in the middle of the night or any other time. Once my Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jared had gone to visit their son who lives in another country. At that time, my older sister Amy, who was 31, and Jess, who's 28, were having their finals for college and high school. Amy is 14 years older than me, and Jess is 10 years older than me. So when they had their finals, I'll be playing around or disturbing them. So to study, they had stayed at my aunt's house for the time being. After staying over there for a few days, suddenly they came back. When I questioned them, they told me the other day Amy was in the kitchen baking. She has a weird habit of baking when she's stressed. When she felt someone walk behind her for a while, she thought it was Jess, but when she felt someone put their chin on her shoulder, she turned to look and saw no one in the kitchen. She had freaked out, and when she questioned Jess told her that she hadn't left the room, which freaked them both, and the next day they rushed back. We don't tell our parents about all this stuff because they don't believe in all this. Another thing I remember is that whenever I was going back to my house, I always had this feeling that I was getting chased, and I would run really fast all the way to my home. My aunt's home was never locked since we live in a gated community and we are really familiar with the neighbours. One time, I remember I went over to her house and it was empty. At that time, Aunt Sarah frequently visited her dad in the hospital. And clearly remember I was standing in the entrance of her room and something ran really fast behind me. At first I thought I'd imagined it, but when I turned to leave, I saw the carpet in the end of the hall was a bit turned over from the corner, like someone stumbled on it. I had ran from there so fast that time. I have noticed that whenever Aunt Sarah wasn't home, I couldn't stay at her house. Something always happened. 2 years ago, Aunt Sarah passed away. The hospital couldn't diagnose what illness she had. One thing you should know about me is I'm extremely good at pretending I'm asleep. So when my mom talked to her sister, I would listen. Not really proud of it, but I'm really curious about almost everything. One time I heard her talk of how Aunt Sarah had told my mom how she, Aunt Sarah, had found something really disturbing hidden above an vent in one of the rooms. She said it looked like an animal's gut or something, and Aunt Sarah once had mentioned to me that her brother had found a weird picture that looked like it was drawn of their family living in horrible conditions. One time I heard my mom say that before Aunt Sarah died, she had told my mom that someone had done this, her illness, to her. I was horrified. After she passed away, I just couldn't go in her house. I literally feel like someone is suffocating me, and that heavy feeling in my chest from before is always still there. Whatever is in her house is extremely powerful now that she's gone. It terrifies me, but occasionally I have to go over there and I just have this weird feeling that makes me look over my shoulders every other minute. Please tell me what I should do and what type of entity is so powerful to do stuff like that. P.S. My Uncle Jared had moved to another country where his son lives after Aunt Sarah's death, so the house is always empty, but occasionally we go over to hers to make sure everything is in its place and nothing needs fixing. Update. I talked with my parents and they were really dismissive of the situation and said that I was being paranoid. So I showed them this thread in the comments where a few people said they had similar incidents. After reading it, they told me to leave it alone and stop thinking about it. I was getting frustrated, so I took it upon myself and called my uncle. We had a lengthy talk, and he told me what I knew was only the tip of the iceberg, and there's been a lot going on in that house since they moved in. Here are a few of the things he mentioned in our talk. Apparently I wasn't the only one who saw the shadow figure of a man. My aunt saw it too, but in another part of the house, my cousin's bedroom, which was always locked, even when my aunt and uncle lived there. When my sister stayed at my uncle's house, he said he actually told them to leave before sundown and not sleep there. He said that there's been a lot of activity, but he won't tell me because he doesn't want to scare me. I absolutely love reading other people's experiences on this page, so I thought I would share one of my own. I regularly visit abandoned buildings, so I have quite a few experiences, but this was my first notable one. I was at a farmhouse that had been abandoned since the late 60s, although it appeared more like a time capsule from the 1920s with the things left inside. This farmhouse was quite literally in the middle of nowhere, nothing but hills and fields as far as you can see. The inside of the house was fully boarded, and so it was pitch black inside. On entering the house, there was an instant feeling of being watched, but maybe that was just because it was so dark it instantly had that creepy vibe. I had forgotten to grab my torch from the car due to the excitement of finding the house, and so me and my boyfriend were using our phone torches to look around. Once we had scoped the whole building, we decided to start taking some pictures. We were in one of the upstairs bedrooms at this time. As soon as I mentioned taking a picture, we both heard a noise directly behind us, as if a chair had been scraped across the floor. We both looked at each other, thinking the other person had accidentally kicked something, but of course, neither of us had. There was a stool in the room at that time, which I then scraped across the floor out of curiosity, and the noise was pretty much the same. Either way, I dismissed this. Old houses do make noises, albeit nothing quite like something scraping across the floor. We continued to go ahead to take some pictures. The first picture my boyfriend wanted to take was a photograph, likely of the previous owners. The photo was an old black and white one, you know, the ones where they never smiled. Naturally, just to add to the creepy allure. As he went to take the photo, his phone literally shut off. He had never had trouble with his phone prior to this, but it literally shut down at the exact moment he went to take a picture. At this moment, I started to panic a little bit, and with my phone now being the only source of light, I thought it best that we leave whilst he tries to fix his phone. As we were stood outside, I felt very unwelcome. I was also panicking as my boyfriend's phone was now not responding to anything, and we didn't have much money at the time, so there's no way we could have afforded a new phone. It was at this point that I decided to talk to any potential spirits that may be around. I explained the circumstance of us not being able to afford a new phone, which is hilarious now that I think about it, and apologised if they felt I invaded their privacy. I then asked if they could fix the phone. After at least 10 minutes of trying to fix the phone, as soon as I asked them to fix it, the phone immediately came back on. After this, we did decide to go back inside. This time around, being inside felt completely different. I felt almost welcomed, but only to explore downstairs. When I looked upstairs, I felt sure there was someone looking down at me, almost as if they were being sure I would not return upstairs. This could all be a series of very freaky coincidences, or maybe there were previous owners still there who were very protective of their home. The place has become more popular in recent years, and many of the personal items of value in the home have been stolen, so it would explain why they wouldn't welcome visitors. When I was 13, my family moved into a new home in a nice neighbourhood in Tucson, Arizona. It was a relatively new build, 2002, and was part of a very nice subdivision. I lived in the house from age 13 to roughly 19. There was a year in the college dorms in the middle. No one had died in the house that I could find, and overall it didn't have any of those haunted house red flags. Also, for context, although I am not very religious, I grew up in an extremely Christian or religious family. The entire time I lived in the house, I had horrible nightmares. to the point where I was scared to go to sleep. My parents would sort of play it off like it was nothing. My parents were on one side of the house and had their own bathroom. On my side of the house, it was just me and no one used my bathroom. At night, I would hear the sink was on and the toilet flushing. No one was ever in the bathroom when I looked. I tried to play it off like it was nothing. I would also hear scratching in the attic relatively frequently. My childhood house had a stray cat that lived in our attic, so I quickly explained that away as likely some sort of animal, even though this was a newer house with a sealed attic and we never found an animal. I thought all of this was just happening to me. Eventually, my mum and dad started talking about footsteps they heard at night. My mum said they would walk around the house, but she didn't feel any negative energy, so she thought maybe it was an angel or deceased loved one protecting us. Insert eye roll at the angel comment here. My dad said the footsteps happened every night. I stayed awake one night and sure as shit, it sounded like someone shuffling through the house. All of this seemed like pretty harmless activity until one night in my late teens. I woke up to find my bedroom door closed. I had a mirror on the back of my bedroom door, and I was always afraid of seeing something in the mirror, so I kept the door open and the hall light on. Everyone in the house knew about my obsession with keeping the door open later when I asked about it. No one in my family said they shut the door. Upon seeing the door shut, I immediately panicked. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and tried not to look at the mirror. I opened the door, took a deep breath, and walked back to my bed. I remember thinking something like, this is the part of the horror movie where I get attacked. And then I laid down in my bed. This next part, I am not kidding. I know people will call bullshit and say it didn't happen, but I know without a shadow of a doubt this happened to me and I can't explain it to save my life. The second I laid down in bed, it was like the covers were pulled up over my face and someone was holding them down over my head. It felt like hands were all over my body, pinning me down. I felt like I was burning all over and I could hear the sound of like firewood burning in my ears. I could also hear laughing. I couldn't move, and I felt like I was going to die. Regardless of your views on religion, all I could think to do was pray. I don't know if I prayed out loud or really loud in my head. I said something like, "In the name of Jesus, stop," 3 times. I remember very specifically on the 3rd time, everything evaporated. My house was quiet and I ran. I bolted into my parents' room, covered in sweat and sobbing. My dad said it was just a nightmare. I got angry and yelled at him for not listening to me. I wouldn't go back into my room. My mom took it a little more seriously. The next day, she had the house anointed and prayed over, and everything stopped. The footsteps, the nightmares, the toilet flushing, everything. We eventually moved out of the house, and nothing like that ever happened again. But it seems that everywhere I go since then, weird shit still happens to me periodically, but not at that scale. Like I said, I'm not super religious anymore, but this is one of those things I can't really explain. I know it happened. My family knows it happened. I can't offer any logical explanation for what happened. Myself and my 2 flatmates, D and H, all 19 female, just moved into a 3-bedroom home on a suburban street in one of the major cities in our country. Since moving in, we've had experiences with weird, unexplainable shit in and around the property, both while together and alone in the house. None of us have ever believed in the paranormal or the supernatural, and while there are definitely logical explanations for all this, we're just at a loss of what they could be. A little quick background. We viewed the property for the first time on January 9th of this year. It was the first place we went to a viewing for. We continued looking at other properties, but the leasing agent contacts us on January 14th to offer us the house. Obviously, we find it very strange that they offered us the house so quickly, but since it's usually pretty difficult for a group of students to convince a landlord to rent to them, and it was the best property we'd viewed, we accepted. They wanted us to move in very quickly, which was also a little bit of a red flag, but we had other people inspect the property for us and didn't find anything super wrong with it, so we went forward with the process. We signed the lease and moved in on February 4th, less than a month after we originally viewed the property. More information for context purposes. Place was built in 2005, sold on November 2020 to our current landlords, who bought it as an investment property after being on the market for a month. The current landlords have never lived in the property, and we have never met or had contact with them. We deal with everything through a property manager. Nobody has lived in the house since at least November 2020, and the listing that we found for it was posted in early December 2020. Generally, a house like this wouldn't stay on the rental market for more than a week or so in our city, because good housing is pretty scarce. We know absolutely nothing about the previous tenants or why they moved out, and neither did any of the agents we spoke to. We also have no clue why the house was on the market for so long. The rent isn't ridiculous, all of the rooms are decently sized and have great views. It's in the zone for multiple good schools, and within walking distance to a major public transport station. There were no super obvious things wrong with the house, and when we looked through it for the first time, apart from just needing a good clean. When we asked the letting agent, she said something vague about how the property was just given to their company from a different real estate company. Our house is at the end of a shared driveway with two other houses. You have to go up a set of external stairs to get to the front door. Downstairs we have an open plan lounge and kitchen and a small bathroom. Upstairs are our 3 bedrooms and another shared larger bathroom. The house backs onto a small hill and then a busy main road. There's a fence with 2 gates that separates us from the main road, which is kind of redundant because there's also a huge gap in our fence line that backs onto a different shared driveway that can very easily accessed from the street. Onto the weird shit. When we first moved in, at some point within the first week, we each felt a specific presence within the house while thinking we were home alone, and each felt the presence so strongly that we had to search the house to confirm that we were actually home alone. While doing our initial cleaning, we found what seems like urine in both mine and H's wardrobes. There was also back scratch marks in my wardrobe that the property manager couldn't explain. Looks like an animal or small child had gone at the wall with something. Won't come off the wall either. We've woken up in the middle of the night to hear loud banging on the side of the house that's facing the fence in the street. None of us investigated the source at the time because, as curious as we were, we're also super passionate about not being murdered. There were also no trees close enough to the house that could have made contact with the wall to explain the banging. While cleaning again a few weeks later, I found what looks like dried blood on the windowsill in the lounge. I have no idea if we missed it during our initial clean or if it was new. 100% did not belong to any of us. Dee kept waking up with bruises all over her legs that she couldn't explain. Legitimately looked like she'd been on the wrong end of a paintball gun. H found a random chicken bone in her balcony. We are primarily a vegetarian household, and the only access to the balcony is through her room. We can track our power usage through an app, and there have been times where we'll have a large spike in power usage at times when none of us have been home. One time in the middle of the night, I woke up to what I thought was someone having a loud conversation in the next room. Turned out to be my laptop, which had somehow turned itself on and had started playing an episode of Friends, which would have been fine if the laptop lid hadn't been shut and locked with both a passcode and facial recognition. It has never happened before and has happened once since, also in the middle of the night. H woke up one night in a state of sleep paralysis. She says she saw a man sitting on her floor next to her bed, watching her and eating cereal. She has never experienced sleep paralysis before, and has not experienced it since. Has no clue who the dude was. We have a sensor light on our deck at the top of the stairs. You have to stand in a very specific place on the deck for it to activate. Just to emphasise, the light will not turn on unless you stand in that very specific place, and even then you have to make some kind of movement for it to see you. While home alone in the lounge, Dee kept hearing noises on the stairs and would open the curtain expecting it to be me coming home from work. The sensor light would be on, but there would be nobody there. This happened multiple times throughout the night. This type of sensor won't get tripped by wind or light, and there are no trees or plants nearby that could have tripped it either. It's not just us experiencing weird shit. One night while Dee's boyfriend was over, Dee and I left the house, leaving him at home alone. H was at work. He texts us shortly after we leave the house to tell us that Dee's bedroom door shuts on its own, and then he heard distinct footsteps down the middle of the stairs. Dee's boyfriend, as a note, is the most cynical motherfucker on the planet. Definitely wouldn't make something like this up. Usually, while the windows are open, the doors will shut on their own due to convection currents, but since it's currently cold as balls, we had shut all of the windows in the house prior to leaving. One of our friends stayed with us during one of the lockdowns, and she also felt a presence upstairs and heard noises while being home alone. Since moving in, H and I have experienced problems with sleep. We've never had problems getting to sleeping prior to moving in. I regularly wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning for no discernible reason. We are by no means light sleepers. Originally, we chalked it up to getting used to a new place, but it's been 4 months now, and it's still happening. In addition to all this, there have been more instances that we can count where we'll hear weird noises from somewhere in the house that are outside of the standard house-making noises as it cools down, and creaking pipes that we just collectively decided to politely ignore. Again, in the interest of not getting murdered. And finally, we have felt distinct, simultaneous declines in our mental health since we moved in. We were each super keen to move out and be independent, but we've all had a significant drop in our mood and well-being, to the point where Dee has had to up her antidepressant dose. There are other factors that could possibly have affected it, but each of us has experienced a kind of low energy that we haven't felt before we moved out, and we couldn't explain it. Our hypothesis. Obviously, all of these events have some kind of explanation, unrelated or not. All of these things could very well be unrelated and coincidental. We're just considering things that would explain all of the strange shit that's been going on, kind of half as a joke, kind of not. Our first hypothesis is that we have a poltergeist of some kind. Would explain the weird noises, the bruises, the low moods, the waking up in the middle of the night, sounding like someone is in the house when there isn't, and the person sitting on H's floor. We've talked about drawing protection runes on all of the entrance points to the house and saging the place, but beyond that, we don't really know what else to do apart from just accept life with our quirky new roommate and hope that they don't go all Annabelle on us. If the place was haunted, it would definitely explain why the agent was so keen to get rid of the property so quickly to a group of naive teenage girls, because we've had no other serious problems with the house. Our second and probably 10 times scarier option is that we actually have someone living on or around our property. There are 2 possible places where this person could be staying. We do have an attic, but the only internal access point is in the wardrobe in my room, and I definitely would have heard somebody climbing in and out of that access point during the night, or noticed stuff being moved around. There might be an external access point on the roof, but we haven't been able to get up there to check. We've heard stuff coming from the roof before, but nothing that we could really definitely say was somebody climbing in there from the outside, or someone moving around up there. The other one is a space underneath the house that we've affectionately dubbed the murder hut, because to be honest, it looks like a serial killer's den. When we first moved in, there was a collection of old furniture there left by, we're assuming by the last tenants. A rug, a chair, a set of drawers, but nothing concrete to suggest there was someone currently living in there. No sleeping area, no food scraps or garbage anywhere. We also thought of the possibility of somebody not physically living and sleeping on the property, but maybe someone just regularly walking onto the property through that big gap in the fence and causing problems. We're really at a loss of what's causing these things. We're getting a security camera for the front door and now deadbolts on the gates outside, in addition to trying out cleansing and purification rituals, just to cover all of our bases. We're also thinking of requesting information about the previous tenants from our property manager and asking about getting the hole in the fence fixed. Can't afford to fix it by ourselves. And we're just being dumb and paranoid? Or is this actually something strange going on in our house? My time in Sri Lanka, I lived there for about a year because of my dad's work. He was working at the oil refineries there. Are some of my most vivid and awesome memories. Rode on an elephant, stayed at an awesome hotel. It was pretty awesome all around. I was living there during a war in the early 2000s, so there were a lot of armed guards, etc. Obviously I didn't understand these things though, that's a bit of a theme. Anyways, my mom and sister had gone to go shopping, and I was left with a nanny. Her name was Auntie Ira. I absolutely loved her. She always kept a close eye on me, as a 3-year-old can get up to some serious mischief. However, she had gone into the other room for a few minutes, probably to cook some food, and had placed me in a cot. During this time, I do not remember the entity entering. I only remember its presence suddenly being known to me. The entity was all black, not like skin colour, think like a shadow, and had no features. It spoke to me, but I distinctly remember not hearing any accent or any real voice. I simply felt its intent bouncing around in my head, such that it felt like it was speaking aloud, not dissimilar to when you self-dialogue in your own head. Though this voice was not my own, and I hadn't even really developed a self-dialogue in my mind yet, as I was so young. I don't remember how, but what I remember is somehow being outside of my cottage, and the entity pushing a chair to the window and opening it, telling me to stand on the chair. The voice was so alluring. It drove me into a sort of trance. My young mind was completely defenceless and simply obliged to the mysterious, though charming figure. It then whispered for me to jump. I distinctly remember the view from my window to the ground below, certain death if I fell, but the entity seemed to take away all concerns of self-preservation. I was going to do it, though I don't know how long I stood there for. However, my mother came into the room and saw me about to go out the window and screamed. Her scream brought me back to some form of lucidity, and she was understandably distraught. We had a long discussion about what had happened. She was a spiritual woman, and seemed to believe what I had said, though at the time I did not understand the concept of reality beyond the physical, and only realised what happened when she told me about the story later in life, reminding me of the memories. Throughout the duration of our stay, I remember said entity outside that same window, not as charming anymore, but staring like a predator watching prey, which made me become scared of him. I believe that this entity has never truly left though, as I saw it again in a mirror in a hotel in Ballina, and I believe it has taken many forms, all with the intent to end my life. Another example is when I was yet again in Ballina, Australia. I saw 2 people playing on the beach, and for an inexplicable reason felt compelled to follow, so I did, until suddenly they were gone, just vanished, and I was a fair ways out at sea. Yet again, it was the screams of my mother that brought me back to my lucidity, and I managed to swim back to shore. Luckily I had those floaty things that you put on your arms as a kid, but without those, I may have been in some serious trouble. I was about 7 at the time. I have also had issues with what my family believed to have been demonic possession. It's not as dramatic as pop culture likes to believe, but just as disturbing. Note, many will say that possession is an excuse for being an inexcusably awful person. I agree most of the time and refrain from such poor attempts at rationalising bad behaviour. However, these are my true experiences. I know how I felt and I know how I got over it, so I implore you to see things as I did. During this time, your mind gradually becomes consumed by violent and completely psychopathic inclinations. Hatred and fear also engulf your psyche, whilst you always feel as if you're being watched. When you close your eyes, you see horrific things, and sleeping is always a terrifying task. This has happened multiple times in my life, but the worst case was when I was in 2nd grade. I essentially became a completely different person. I got in trouble for talking about murdering my peers, drew awful pictures about torture during art classes, and I often bullied and harassed other kids. A typically creepy kid that became an edgelord a little too early. Well, it reached a climax when I led the kids in my year level to harass another kid on baseless rumours, after which they all pointed the finger at me, and I was dealt swift justice. I got exactly what I deserved. I was openly humiliated in front of my peers, screamed at my parents and teachers alike, and became an outcast until high school. However, such punishment, however deserved, only heightened the growing evil inside me. My parents saw this clearly and so took me to paediatricians, psychologists, the works. I was diagnosed with ADHD, anxiety and Tourette syndrome and was told to medicate. We initially declined, but we would take them up on this a year later. Lastly, we saw many spiritual leaders and healers, though none could help. Finally, we attempted a sort of exorcism, in private. No convulsions on the ground or anything so dramatic, simply very firm prayer. This was when I felt the thing left me, and as a result, I took a turn for the better, though healing was gradual and took many years. I am now Christian and have given my soul to the Lord, realizing that it was likely divine protection that guarded me from this entity, from outright killing me, and it was divine intervention that I had freed from its grasp. I'm an adult now and like to believe that I have atoned for my past sins and have truly overcome this entity, becoming a better person. However, I post this because the same entity has revealed itself again, though I suspect its influence recently as a string of malevolent coincidences have plagued me. Indeed, I felt it appear yet again, but it was like it was always there and only decided to make me aware of it. This has followed a sequence of highly spiritual dreams of intense sin, hell, and the road I was going down in 2nd grade, though fast-forwarded into adulthood, warnings from God I believe of the entity's trickery. I'm sure it intends to assault me again. It must have had a reason for trying to kill me when I was too young to think, and trying to corrupt me when I was too young to properly self-reflect. Now it seems to have gotten much bolder. I do fear it as a human. I cannot stand against such an ancient being, but through faith, my fear is swept away. So, back in 2014 and 15, I don't exactly remember. I was around 8 or 9. Me and my family, my aunts, grandma and grandpa, my mum and some of my aunt's friends, went to this beach which is quite famous in the country I live. It was supposed to be a 3 days and 2 nights trip. Everything was fine, but I don't know why I didn't like the hotel we booked at all. It wasn't because of appearance or the hospitality, rather it was because of the creepy feeling I got in there. And it was truly creepy that even after so long, I clearly remember what happened and what I felt. I did tell my mother that I didn't like the hotel, but she probably just thought it was a child's tantrum or something. I don't remember exactly what we spoke about. So for 2 complete days, I suppressed the feeling of someone staring at me, like the feeling someone gets when a person is staring at you with too much intensity. I shook it off, but something happened on the last day of our stay there, and it still creeped me out in different levels. It was night. Our luggage was packed. I was a kid, so I was sharing a room with my mother. We were sleeping, but suddenly the lights went off. My body temperature from birth is very high, so naturally I feel like really hot, even when the AC is on sometimes. I remember waking up while panting. I'd woken up because of feeling hot before, but it was nothing like the one I felt that day. It was a suffocating heat, like something or someone was pressing down on my chest. I felt so damn hot, but I was unable to wake up. I could feel my back being drenched in sweat, but still I was unable to open my eyes. Finally, after a while, I don't remember how long, I managed to open my eyes, and what I saw still haunts me to this date. My feet faced a balcony, and there was a window a bit further away from the door, which led to said balcony. The curtains that were actually drawn to prevent the streetlights from entering were pulled open. The window that was closed was open, and there was a person standing right outside. I couldn't see that person in the darkness, but I still remember those eyes that I couldn't see, but I did feel them staring back at me. They weren't very kind, rather I would say I could freaking feel the malicious intent steeping out of them. I remember trying to scream out loud, but I couldn't. It was like the same feeling, the feeling of something weighing down on me. I was so scared that I probably trembled in fear. I don't know for how long it happened, but at some point, I remember shutting my eyes closed, and that's all I remember from that night. The next morning when I woke up, my mother saw that I was visibly scared, and I almost hysterically asked her if there was a lights out yesterday. And she said there was nothing like that. If it was to be like then, we should have known. I told her everything, but she didn't believe me. Every single person I told didn't believe me. Rather, they took it as some sort of nightmare. But honestly speaking, though I was young, I can assure you people it wasn't a nightmare. A nightmare can't be that realistic. No one till this day believes me, and I too at some point stopped speaking about it. But I never actually forgot about it, and I don't think I ever will. Maybe to other people this doesn't seem very scary, but I still get nightmares about that night. And I truly hope that I could forget that cursed night, but I just can't. It is literally living in my head rent-free. Doesn't matter how much I want to kick it out. It just doesn't go away. My girlfriend and I wake up at the same time and call each other over Snapchat's video call service every morning. We both take virtual classes, so it's a fun way to start our mornings. This morning, shortly after we had both woken up, she fell back asleep. I placed my phone on my desk this morning and then left to make some coffee and breakfast. When I returned, she had hung up on the call and had sent multiple messages with sad faces and my name. I noticed that she had tried to call me multiple times with the video feature turned off. I called her back with my video on. She was crying and asked me what I was doing. I explained to her that I went to go make breakfast. She asked me if I'd come back at any time, to which I told her I hadn't. When I told her this, she began crying harder. I was very confused. I did my best to console her while still trying to understand what was making her upset. She made me promise her multiple times that I hadn't come into the room while I was making breakfast. I told her I hadn't. She began explaining to me that she saw me standing in the room. She saw me facing the phone a few feet away from it, staring into the camera. She was confused for a few seconds, but she told me that she knew something was wrong after a while. She told me that my eyes were unnaturally wide and unblinking. She thought the camera had frozen, but she said she could see my body moving slightly and my arms swaying. She was deeply disturbed and hung up after 30 seconds. I was very taken aback by this. I've had absolutely no paranormal experiences in this house. I've lived here for more than 6 years. The only thing I can think of that may have incited some type of paranormal activity would be something that happened on my property decades ago. My property used to have an attached barn. One of the previous owners hung himself in that barn. Like I said, I've never experienced anything paranormal in this house. I've considered the possibility that maybe she's just had a nightmare. But she seems confident that she was awake. I'm really not sure what to make of this. I don't feel uncomfortable sitting in the room she saw the dark copy of me. It feels just how it did before. If anybody could help shine some light on what just happened or a possible explanation, I would greatly appreciate it. Around early April of last year, I was working at a nursing home doing night shifts. I was working as a nurse's aide and it was on a brain injury unit. It was quite the experience to say the least, especially during the pandemic. Anyway, one night, we had completed all of our work and were just waiting out a couple of hours until the morning. I was 3 other HCAs that night and one was on a break, so it was myself and my partner. I was browsing Reddit on the company tablet and my partner was drifting in and out of sleep. It was dead silent for hours at this point. No resident had called. Out of nowhere, the TV down the hallway turns on and it starts screeching with that horrible static noise and got louder and louder. My partner jolts up and we look at each other. I said something like, "It's probably John," one of the residents, and then I walked down towards the lounge area where the TV was. There was no one there, and shockingly, the remote had no batteries in it. I could only control it through the on-TV buttons. Weird. We both disregarded it and laughed it off, and then she goes for break and my other partners come back. I tell her what happened and she started acting very anxious and scared, pacing and asking me to repeat what happened like 2 or 3 times. A resident called and later on she calmed down and we were watching TV in the main dining hall now. Off to the corner of the dining area is a sink, one of those sensor ones, and it starts running and no one is anywhere near it. It runs for like minutes and I end up shutting off the supply. Odd, but not really weird. This is where I almost shat myself. A resident called, say Bob. I walked down the hallway to his room. As I turned, I saw him standing in the corner, face against the wall. He was naked, covered in blood and shit, and mumbling, almost chanting, while rocking back and forth. As I call out his name and walk towards him, he collapses on the floor. What the fuck? Some background on Bob. He's been bound to his wheelchair for the past 5 years. Although he has some strength to stand for a couple minutes, he definitely can't walk. Or at least I thought he couldn't. To add to that, Bob is very calm and nice, always thanking staff and stuff like that. This was a very weird and creepy experience. I later talked to the nurse about a week later, and apparently he had some type of psychotic break induced by his meds, which interacted negatively with his bipolar and brain injury. My son was born with a single heart ventricle and needed 3 open heart surgeries before the age of 5 to survive. After my son's 3rd surgery, he developed an extremely rare complication that could only be resolved with a heart transplant. We lived in the hospital for almost 3 months while he was on the transplant list. I can honestly say those were the worst 3 months of my life, seeing my son suffer and not knowing if he'd be okay. It was absolute torture. During the course of waiting, the complication was unexpectedly resolved, and he no longer needed the heart transplant. Believe me when I say that it was nothing short of a miracle. No one could have predicted that he wouldn't need the transplant. Fast forward to a couple of months after we finally come home. I was going through some boxes that had my husband's old family pictures in it, including some pictures of my son's grandfather, my father-in-law. My father-in-law died 16 years before my son was born, so my son had never met him. We didn't have any pictures of him in our house at that time either. At some point, my son sat next to me at the kitchen table to see what I was doing. We come across a picture of my father-in-law, and my son says, "Oh hey, I know that guy." I said, "You don't know him, buddy. You've never met him. He died a long time ago, before you were born." My son had a very serious expression on his face and said, "Yes, I did, Mummy. I know him. That's Bill. He used to sit next to me every night at the hospital and watch me. I think he was a doctor or something." My father-in-law's name was Bill. My son didn't know that. I don't know what to make of this, but I like the idea of my son's grandfather watching over him during the scariest time of our lives, which was resolved through a legitimate miracle. My son is 13 now, and I like to think that he has a guardian angel watching over him. The story is about my father, and my uncle had this experience when they were kids. Fair warning, it might get a bit lengthy. My father and his elder brother, my uncle, were like best friends from childhood. My father used to live in a joint family. He used to live in a very small village called Maharashtra State, India. The village is located a bit in the jungle, with a population of hardly 500 to 800 people at the time. Farming was the main occupation, with little to no electricity, and also lack of wall clocks, so they used to decide their time according to the daylight. It was around 1966 or so. Now I know it sounds like medieval time, but that was the situation for tribal people in India. So my father then, 8 or 10 years old, and my uncle then 15 or 16, used to get up early in the morning around 4 AM, and used to go into the jungle to cut the woods for daily needs like cooking. But before that, my aunt, their elder sister, used to make some breakfast for them, like bakri, kind of an Indian bread, and sabji, curry for relevance. She either used to pack a tiffin for them so they could eat later, or used to deliver the food by herself at early dawn with my grandfather, who used to start the farm's work. The jungle was near the farms, and my father and uncle used to go to the familiar area of the jungle, which my aunt was very well aware of. She used to track them down easily, have their breakfast together, and then come back together with the wood logs. One day, my uncle and father got up early in the morning as usual. It was still dark and it was winter. Sunrise is a bit late during this season. My aunt was still sleeping, so they decided not to disturb her, and they picked up their axes and went for the jungle. That day, they decided to go a bit further than usual, but in reality, they went way too far. They were not even able to see the lantern lights of the village. They started cutting a tree and gathered little sticks from the ground. They got very busy and concentrated for the time being. After 1.5 hours or so, my uncle got suspicious over why the sun was not rising yet. By this time, there was supposed to be birds start singing, and no rooster was making that typical morning noise, no cattle were mooing, no dogs barking which comes along with the shepherds. All that was in eerie deep silence. It was so silent, in fact, that my uncle got worried that they were pretty early than the usual time, so he started to hurry up at his work. Now, before going on any further, let me be clear about my uncle. He's a very tough guy. Nothing scares off the dude easily, and he's respected by the whole village. Same goes for my father. But this time it was different. He didn't know why, but he was feeling that there was something very wrong, and something was watching him from deep jungle, and my uncle knew it better. It was not some tiger, cheetah, jaguar, or wild boar. He felt something was wrong that day. And then all of a sudden, my father and uncle heard the voice of my aunt from a long distance. They couldn't see her, it was just a voice. My uncle got very suspicious as the voice was coming from deep jungle and not from the direction of the village. My uncle told my father to tell her to come to them, so my father responded to her voice and told her to come to them. The voice stopped for a moment, and then she replied, "No, you come to me, hurry. I've brought your favourite food." At this moment, my uncle realised what it is. He's heard a lot of stories from the villagers of a voice which takes away people, sometimes never to be found again, or if founded, will be in a suicidal mental state. The local used to call such paranormal activities as chakra, meaning the paranormal being who will hypnotically fool you to commit suicide. As soon as my uncle snapped out of his thoughts, he realised that my father, being a naive kid, started walking towards the voice and started responding to my aunt's entity's voice. It was taking my father's name and yelling, "Come in this direction, I am here, waiting with the breakfast." My uncle ran towards my father with full speed, grabbed him by his shirt collar and said, "Don't listen to her, come on, we must go home." My father said, "But it's elder sister, she is calling us, I am hungry." By that time, my uncle has already grabbed my father's hand and told him she is bluffing with us, she has no food now, come on. My father was about to start arguing with my uncle, but then he looked in my uncle's eyes. He certainly looked scared and his hand was shaking. Father too sensed that something was wrong and started walking fast towards the village without a word uttered. "Why are you going towards that side? Come here. Follow my voice," she said. My uncle, still holding my father's hand, said, "Ignore her. She is not coming to us anyway." No need to say he was trying to divert my father's attention and play it cool so that he doesn't panic. As they were walking towards the village, they felt as if an eternity to get there. Now, being Hindu by religion, my uncle started mumbling mantras of Lord Rama, Hindu god. The voice slowly started fading away as they were getting closer to the village. My uncle took a long sigh of relief when the dog started barking, all of a sudden from the village direction, on noticing that some of the village lamps were close by. The whole village dogs gathered together and started barking and making that loud crying noises like wolves. My uncle reckons the entity might still be following them. My uncle and father almost started running towards the village, and finally reached the village. The voice was long gone, and there was a sense of lightheartedness. My uncle stopped near our ancestral temple, joined his hand, bowed his head and said thank you. My father was still confused with the situation. Once they reached home, my uncle and father saw that my aunt was still in her bed. My father, being called a naive child, cursed her for beating them in the race. Turns out they both left the house way too early, at 2 a.m. or even earlier, and it was a no-moon night, so it was dark already. My father got fever for a few days, and when my aunt told him that she didn't go up that morning, let alone make the food, my grandfather and uncle knew better and are thankful to God to this day. About 5 years ago, I had just moved into a new house with my wife at the time, and 2 kids aged 2.5 and 1. My 2.5-year-old was very articulate for his age, and so one day we were walking out the front door. He points across the house and asks, "Mommy, who's that little girl over there?" Well, my wife and I just kind of froze, because he was kind of kid that never made up any imaginary friends or anything like that. But the moment passed, and we kind of forgot about it. About 6 or 8 months later, I remember I was in my bedroom late at night. I have a large window in my bedroom that looks out into my backyard. I also had a couple strings of lights overhead that illuminated the yard perfectly. One night, I was up studying for a class the next day. When I looked outside, I saw that my kid's swing set had one swing going back and forth in a perfect pendulum motion, like someone was on it, while the swing next to it was dead still. This was not the first time this happened. It was the third, I think. But it was the incident that I remember the most clearly and took the most notice. I honestly have no idea why I didn't think to tell my wife or to take a video, but I just stood there in the window and watched it for about 2 minutes, and it kept up perfectly consistently. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out to my deck to get a better look. Still swinging. I'd been studying lots of science classes at that point, so my head was in the space of, I'm going to figure out the rational explanation of why this is happening. It was breezy out, so I walked up to the swing set and held my hand in different places around the swinging swing, and no breeze. Plus, the swing next to it was still dead. Also, my thought was that if it was the wind, there was no way it could keep a perfect back and forth motion. If a swing gets even a little of it, it would have collided with the one next to it. Anyway, I'm not sure if I had the previous encounter with my son in mind or not, but I had a very certain feeling at that moment that there was a little girl swinging on the swing. Almost like I could see her, but obviously couldn't. I also felt very at ease and not frightened at the least. Then after about 5 or 10 minutes, I stopped the swing just to see what would happen, and it remained stopped. I remember apologising out loud to the girl for stopping the swing, and told her that she could swing whenever she wanted to, but it never happened again after that, and I haven't had any additional encounters in this house. I looked up public records and asked the landlord if there was ever any little girl that had died in this house. Nothing. The only info that I could collect is that a few years before we moved in, there was an elderly woman who lived here for 20 years, but the owner had the landlord kick her out in fear that she would die in the property, so she had to move in with a family a few states away. So, a few years ago, me and a buddy from the army decided to meet up and catch up. So we decided on the date and place after several hours at the local pub. It was around 1 AM. We had 3 beers each and decided to go pay our respects to a friend of ours who died a few years ago and was with us in the army. We bought a bottle of our friend's favourite booze and drove towards the graveyard. When we came there and started walking towards the gate, we both saw someone standing there. As we got closer, I could defo recognise the friend we were going to visit at the graveyard. He was standing there in his uniform, holding a rifle, and was waving at us to come closer. I was freaked out by what I was seeing, so I just turned to my friend and looked at him and asked if he was seeing what I am seeing. He was so shocked he couldn't even talk and was just nodding his head with his mouth open. So we backed away slowly and went back to the car and drove away as fast as we could from there. Where I'm from, they say never go close if you see the dead calling you over. But ever since that day, I keep hearing someone call my name behind me when I'm all alone. At first, I thought it was my wife messing with me, but it's not possible because it's a male voice. I'm really freaking out. A few times I left my phone recording all night to prove my wife that I'm not going insane, but every time there's zero evidence, just static and me and my wife snoring. I asked a friend who was with me if he experienced the same stuff, and he has. Anyone have any experience with this or know what the fuck is going on? And am I confused why the dead friend would be in a uniform and holding a rifle? He died from leukemia a few years ago, not from during the war. Since my fiancée started working second shift, I started having my 3-year-old and 1-year-old sleep in bed with me. Something scary happened last Tuesday, around 11:30 at night. My son CJ woke up from his sleep, crying and scared. I asked what's wrong, and he wouldn't stop pointing at the corner. I used my phone flashlight, which wasn't really helping because the corner was still dark. He's never freaked out that bad before, so I started getting scared. I FaceTimed my fiancée, and you know how you FaceTime someone and your flashlight turns off when they pick up? Yeah, when the flashlight went out, CJ was freaking out bad. Then he started acting like whatever he was seeing at the corner of the room was moving closer to the end of our bed. The way you can see the terror in his eyes as his eyes were slowly moving with its movements towards us at the end of the bed, as if it was moving closer to us. CJ was freaking out so bad, scrambling to the corner of the bed, trying to get away from it. He wouldn't stop screaming for me, even though I was trying to help him. I was getting terrified myself, so I turned on the TV. He calmed down a bit, but I had to click on the app KidsTube, and as it was loading up, The screen went dark. Once the room went dark again, CJ started freaking out worse at whatever he was looking at the end of our bed. I finally got his favourite cartoon on and he finally calmed down and cuddled up with me. He started watching TV until he eventually fell back to sleep. But oh my god, when small kids see something, you've just gotta believe them. I was so scared I left the TV on until my fiancée got back from work. CJ sometimes wakes up from a night terror and be pointing at the corner, but I usually cuddle back with him to sleep. That stopped for months. Then, out of nowhere, last Tuesday night, it was like something new showed itself to my son. And this is the same corner my 1-year-old daughter used to smile and laugh with. But this is the worst CJ has ever freaked out. Since that night, almost every single night, he would wake up at 11:30, crying and scared, looking at something. It makes it more legit because it's consistently on time every night. It never fails to show up on time and scare my child. Like, why 11:30? Why is this terrorizing my son? I'm more concerned now because last night at 11:30, my son woke up scared and crying but was answering yes to whatever he was looking at the end of our bed. I believe he's seeing something that's terrorizing him. My mom has a history of seeing spirits. She can walk into a house and take her time reading the place to know what kind of spirits and how many are in the home. My older brother has a history of experiencing weird shit too, so I know my son is gifted because it runs in his blood. But I want this to stop. It's the bedroom of the house, I know it is. The house has been in my fiance's family for over a few decades. His niece, who's 18 years old now, used to talk to someone in that exact bedroom when she was small. His nephew, who's 5 years old now, used to call someone by the name Abby in the exact same room. And my fiance's little brother, who's 24 now, used to ask his parents about the old man in the bedroom when there was no old man. My fiance says they've gotten monks to bless the home so many times already. You probably won't see this, but we call those things in Islam and Arabic as jinn. They are basically ghosts, but they are not spirits or souls of dead people. I was always confused on how other people were scared of a soul of a dead person instead of a demon or something. There are different beings. Babies or children and animals can see and feel them when they are not hiding themselves, and they can shapeshift like an illusion or something and change their voice and give you dreams or nightmares. I remember 2 encounters I had with them. The first was when I was maybe 4 or something, with my 6-year-old brother, and our house was small. We were in the bedroom on the bed with our mother getting ready to sleep, and suddenly we heard marks of scraping. We looked up and saw a mark of 3 nails or 3 lines being made on the ceiling with the sound. Our mother hugged us tightly. They continued about 7 centimeters, then stopped. You might say it's something on the roof or etc. Most, if not all, Arab houses are made with thick concrete or stone blocks which are filled, and the marks were made inside. The next day, when my mother reported the encounter to our father, he said that a couple of days ago he felt an urge to wake up from sleep at night, which he did, and saw a small imp-like shadow that quickly darted out of the room as if floating super fast. The door was open a little. For the next couple of years or months that we stayed in that house, I woke up to those marks in the ceiling every morning, and to this day, my big brother and mother remember this event. Second encounter was in a new, bigger house. I was laying on my stomach watching TV at the bottom right edge of the bed, and the door was open to my right. In the corner of my eye, I saw a hairless, browless white person slowly sticking one of his eyes out to peek in the room. I turned my eyes just in time to look at him, in the eyes. Then he pulled back super fast. I jumped out of bed and looked into the hallway immediately to see that no one was there. I went to my mom because she was the only white person in the house. She was quite far away in a room at the end of the balcony, ironing clothes, and I asked her, "Mom, were you spying on us?" She replied with no. I don't remember what she said exactly, but I knew my mother when she was lying. Also, she would have made a lot of noise because I checked the hallway very fast. She has a heavy footstep. My little brother told me he once saw my mother heading towards the ironing room and was following her and calling her, but she ignored him and walked fast. He couldn't see her face, and she entered the ironing room. Then he went in front of the door and saw no one inside of the room. He peeked his head without entering and found nothing. He felt uneasy entering the room alone, and Mom disappeared, so he walked away. For 3 years, my husband and I lived in a large Victorian townhouse in London. Due to extreme property prices in the area, anyone from the UK will know London prices are something else. We shared the house with 2 other couples. Some weird shit went down at that house. Banging in the attic, doors opening or closing by themselves, lights turning themselves on and off, scratching in the walls. But none of those compare with 2 incidents I had in the humming ghost. It's important to note that the first incident happened when it was just myself and my husband in the house. It was a normal evening, and my husband was taking a shower in the downstairs bathroom. While he was showering, I realised I needed to use the toilet, so rather than disturb him, I went to the upstairs bathroom, located directly on top of the downstairs bathroom. I could hear the shower running and him humming to himself, the way he often does. He was humming the tune of Greensleeves. Suddenly, I dropped my phone on the bathroom floor, and he stopped humming as if he'd heard the bang from above. Moments later, he resumed humming, louder now and faster paced. I finished in the upstairs bathroom and went back to our bedroom to wait for my husband to return from his shower. He came in the room about 10 minutes later, and I grinned at him and I said, "I could hear you humming again." He looked confused and said, "I wasn't humming." I said, "Yes, you were humming Greensleeves. It was definitely coming from the downstairs bathroom, and it was definitely your voice. No one else is in. Who could it be?" My husband went pale and told me that he also heard someone humming Greensleeves, but he thought that was me as it was coming from the upstairs bathroom and sounded like my voice. We just looked at each other in quiet horror. He's not one to joke about things like that at all. Plus he's a very bad liar, and I can tell when he's being genuine. Whoever or whatever was humming definitely was sentient and aware, as the humming stopped when I dropped my phone. It couldn't have been a neighbour or a housemate and was 100% coming from the downstairs bathroom in my husband's voice. That was the first incident. The second incident was a lot creepier. It was the middle of the night and our cat started doing her usual zoomies and scratching around the bed. I got up to let her out and she dashed on through to the kitchen. Usually she'd head straight to the back door, but this time she stopped suddenly in the middle of the kitchen. Her back arched and her fur puffed up, and she stood completely still and tense, staring at the corner of the room. As soon as I entered the kitchen, I felt something was very wrong. My stomach dropped and I was rooted to the spot. And then the humming started. It was just the same few notes hummed rhythmically and repeatedly. There was no recognizable tune, and the voice this time sounded old and pained and definitely feminine, and was coming from inside the kitchen, over by where the cat was staring. In that corner there was a small dinner table and chairs, and nothing else to explain the sound. No housemate, no husband, no radio, no other appliances. I was rooted to the spot for God knows how long, just watching the corner of the room and listening to the rhythmic humming. Suddenly, the cat came out of a trance and ran back past me to our bedroom. I was quick to follow and noped the fuck out of the kitchen and sprinted back to our bedroom, leapt into bed and hid under the covers with the cat under my arm. That happened about 2 years ago, and we've since moved into our own place in a different part of London, but I still think about that humming a lot. Just writing this now sends shivers down my spine. It's hard to do justice to the sheer terror I felt, or how that humming sounded, or how I've spent hours trying to figure out a logical solution. Has anyone else ever experienced anything like this? I live in Melbourne. We're back in a lockdown at the moment, not allowed to go out unless it's for essentials, or our daily 2 hours of permitted exercise. Anyways, we're all a bit sick of it, so 2 other mates and I decided to go for a couple drinks and a walk. When our night was over, one of my mates went off towards his house on the walk home. And my other mate and I, who I live on the same streets, chose to go down this dirt road that's purely residential and barely ever used because it was a bit of a shortcut. As I'm walking down the road, my friend is on his phone, not paying much attention to anything. I see a street sign up ahead and what appears to be a couple of human-shaped figures pacing up and down around it. I point it out to my friend and he looks up. As he does, one of the figures disappears, and the other starts ducking up and down and moving side to side under the streetlight. We both give each other a quick "what the fuck" and prepared ourselves to get into some sort of altercation. As we walked towards the street sign, the figure simply disappeared. We got to where it was and shone our phone torches around the area, and there was simply no sign of anyone having been there. And it made sense. As we walked past the area, we saw my best friend, heard a quiet screeching noise, though I did not, but we kept walking very quickly. The road is barely used. It's about 1 AM and we're in lockdown where we're being ordered to stay at home. You'd understand if it was just some kids having some harmless fun pranking pedestrians, but there's simply no chance it was. If you wanted to fuck with people, you'd do it on a road that's frequently driven or walked down, and certainly not at 1 AM in a lockdown where the chances of actually seeing people to prank are so small. Has anyone else had a similar experience? The figures were so human-like it was mind-blowing to see no trace of anyone having been there. First, some background info. This happened about 4 years ago in a house where I lived with my mom and my brother. My mom and my brother still live there. An old couple died in this house before we moved in. There's a small basement which me and my dad decorated, so it's my extra room, if that makes sense. The basement has a separate door from the outside. One day I was chilling in the basement with my friend watching some movies. We were home alone. My mum was at work until 8 PM. We told her to bring us some snacks when she comes back. It was about 8:15 when we heard the main door of the house opening, steps going from the living room to the kitchen, chairs moving, etc. Normal noise you hear when someone is upstairs. We both heard it and I was like, "My mom came home," and he said, "Yeah, I hear it. Snacks are here." A few minutes later, my phone rings. It's my mom. I was like, "Okay, probably she's calling so we get the snacks." I answer and she says, "I'm stuck at work. I'll be home by 10. Problem with security." I was speechless. I looked at my friend and he was shaking. He heard my mom through the phone. I had one key to the house, my mom had the other. My brother was at Grandma's place. Nobody else had a key. There were only 2 keys. So we went upstairs to the main door. It was locked, lights out. I opened and we searched the house. Nothing weird, just as we left it. There were no chairs moved, even though both of us heard them moving. It gives me chills even thinking about it. I heard a lot of steps and movement upstairs when I was alone in the basement, but didn't think much of it, since only I heard it. But since my friend heard it too, I'm starting to think that everything else I heard was also true, and not just my imagination. This story takes place when I was in 6th grade. I'm 21 now. I lived with my mum and my brother in a small but pretty house. When you enter the house, you have a small place to leave your shoes, then big wooden door to slide to enter the living room. On the left is a hallway. When you enter the hallway on the right is a kitchen, and on the left the bathroom. At the end of the hallway there are 2 bedrooms, my mother's is on the right, and mine which I shared with my brother on the left. The living room floor and hallway floor is from a different material. The living room floor is more squeaky. This is important to the story. It was early in the morning. My mom went to work and she drove my brother to school. I also had school, but mine started like 30 minutes later than my brother's, so I stayed at home and watched cartoons. I was laying in bed with the doors open. The doors were behind me. As I'm watching TV, I heard Mom's bedroom door opening. It was very loud, like someone was in a hurry. Then footsteps in the hallway going to the living room. I could hear when footsteps got to the living room since the floor began to squeak. Then the big wooden door sliding. And after that, nothing. Silence. I was terrified. I was in the fetal position on my bed looking for my phone in my bed sheets. Once I found it, I texted my mom, "Someone is in the house." She responded, "Are you joking?" I said, "No, come fast, I'm scared." She sent the neighbour to check on me. The main door and the big wooden doors were closed, but my mom's door was wide open. I still don't know what happened. If this was the only occurrence, I wouldn't even care, but something is definitely in that house. I used to live with my mom, brother, and our pets in a small house around 2017. This house had the presence of 4 spirits, according to my older sister, who can see and feel them. One of the spirits was a young boy, around 7 to 9 years old. The second was a woman. She appeared to my sister without a shirt on. According to my sister, she died very suddenly as she was changing. The third was a young man. My sister didn't know much about him other than the fact that he was a little bit of a prankster. The last one she didn't know much about. It was very hard to read, but very dark. Now, to the incident. I want to preface this with a couple things, as it will rule out potential questions after the fact. I mentioned previously we had pets. This is important because this story involves my old dog. To paint a word picture, he was very energetic, yellow, Labrador, a little over a year old. Now my dog had intense separation anxiety, so whenever I'd leave the house, I left him in the living room or the hallway outside my room, lock the bedroom door. I didn't want him getting into pot paraphernalia, and I'd leave through my window to kind of confuse him. Yes, it's weird, I know, but his area was right next to the front door. Also, I mentioned previously I lived with my mom and brother, and I'd like to point out at the time of this incident, neither of them were home, and my brother swears he had nothing to do with it. Now that that's out of the way, one day I had left to go do something. Fast forward a couple hours and the front door is locked, so I decided to climb back in through my window, and I noticed something weird right off the bat. I have curtains in my window, and right before I climbed in, I could tell that they had been pulled on. I climb into my room and I'm absolutely floored. My entire room is destroyed, and my dog's just sitting there. The door's closed. Also, there's this insanely uncomforting energy as I angrily shoo my dog out of the room. Now, I find this weird for multiple reasons. 1, my dog was just sitting there. He's an extremely energetic boy. 2, my room's destroyed. Posters, records torn off the wall. My bongs and other glass were tilted, but not broken. On my table, my curtains were ripped down. And obviously my first thought is that my brother had let my dog into my room to get back at me for something, and my dog just got anxious and destroyed everything. But the problem with that was A, my brother wasn't home, and B, nothing had bite marks or paw prints or any sign of a dog. And like I said before, posters and things hung on the walls were all over the floor. How could my dog do this? My bongs were on their sides but not shattered. If my dog had really made this mess, they would have been on the floor, broken. C, my door was locked before I left, but somehow unlocked when I returned. At first it looked like it was my dog's doing. It only made sense because of his severe anxiety. But as I explained the details to more of my family, they agreed with me when I said that it was one of our friends, how we used to refer to our house spirits, and they wanted to pin it on my dog for some reason. It's years later and I'm still trying to make sense of it and figure out which one of them it could have been. I've had a couple other experiences in that room in particular, but that was one of the most intense. Shortly after that incident, we blessed the house, moved away, and my older sister moved in with her family. She now has my old room. What I'm about to write about has been spotted in my old house on multiple occasions by 2 other people than myself. Coincidence or not, here's my little story of what we've seen. The first encounter. I was pretty young, I'd say about 8 to 10 years old. The upstairs of my old house has 3 rooms, all with open doors. It goes bathroom, our bedroom, my sister and I, and my parents' room. The first time I seen this shadow figure was when I was brushing my teeth in our bathroom. I remember seeing this figure perform a trust fall, basically falling backwards with its arms spread into my mom's bed. I witnessed this out of the corner of my eye, or my peripheral vision. I was scared at first, but I brushed it off to just be my imagination. I've seen this figure a few more times and decided to tell my parents about it. Of course, they didn't believe me, so I decided to just tell myself it was nothing until the next time I see it. This time my sister was with me. Second encounter. So it was late at night. My parents were at the New Year's party, I believe, and my sister and I were home alone. She's 8 years older than me, so she was babysitting, you could say. The downstairs rooms in order were our living room, secondary living room, and our kitchen with a big archway. My sister and I in the kitchen was making sandwiches, and again, through my peripheral vision, I seen this figure sitting on the couch. I tell my sister about it and tell her to slowly back up and don't look right at it. I knew from previous experience it disappeared when looked at straight on. She did as I said and freaked out a little bit. She also seen it sitting on the couch. However, she said it had wings. I didn't see that part. I was just so thrilled somebody else had witnessed it with me. This kind of got me scared and excited at the same time, because I was no longer the only one. Third encounter. Now, I kept this a family secret. I didn't go around telling anybody because I didn't want to sound crazy. That being said, my buddy used to come over a lot and sleep over. We didn't have a spare bed, so we would take a bunch of blankets and lay them out on the living room floor. We would watch movies and eat snacks and just do goofy shit that preteens would do. My sister sometimes accompanied us, and this time she was there. I remember my friend and I pillow fighting when he just stops and drops the pillow. I took the swing and hit him in the head, but he just sat there with a frightened look on his face. I thought I got him good, but then he told me that he'd seen somebody in the other room. I asked him to describe what he'd seen, and he told me it was a man in all black, just like the shadow figure we've been seeing. I took this as confirmation that it may not have been all in my head anymore. Years later, I found out that my mom got the bed from her friend. It was her friend's father's who passed away in that same bed. Could all just be a coincidence, but I'll never forget what I saw. To this day, I'm still skeptical of the paranormal because I've yet to experience anything as an adult, but I keep looking forward to it, as crazy as that sounds. For context, let me start by saying my mom was born in 1935, so this story happened somewhere in the early to mid-40s. At the time, her family was living somewhere near Ignacio, Colorado. Her father, my grandpa, raised sheep for a living, so yeah, they were not well off. I mention all this because it helps explain the circumstances that are to follow. I should also mention my mom was raised strictly devout Catholic. Growing up, she reserved her most severe punishments for lying, and all through my life, I cannot identify a single time where I could honestly say I have witnessed her lying. In the house in which my mom lived, there was no electricity, no plumbing, no heating, and certainly no cooling. My mom said they used to have a wood-burning cast-iron cook stove, one with 4 burners covered by lids. I imagine it wasn't very big, because she said they would move it outside in the summer, but would bring it outside during the winter, for heat as well as for cooking. The place where it lived during the winter also happened to be the room my mom slept in. One night, Mom said she was awakened by a racket in her room. She turned up the flame on her kerosene lamp and looked to see what was going on. Looking to the stove, she said the burner covers were rattling. For starters, this was a problem because it was summer and the stove had already been moved outside. It was just the stove there, not the stove pipe. The front of the stove was glowing, like it was really hot. After a moment, a ball of flame rose up through the hole where the stovepipe fit. It drifted up to the ceiling and back down into the stove. She said it moved like it was dancing, and it was trailed by a column of smoke and seemed to glow slightly green. At that point, Mom said her kerosene lamp sputtered and went out. When it did, the room went completely dark. There was no fireball, no glowing green smoke, no glow from the stove. Nothing. Only the clattering sound remained. She quickly reignited the lamp, and as light filled the room, the stove and everything else rematerialized. Apparently, my grandma had heard of the commotion. She went to where my mom was sleeping to see what was going on. Mom said that as the door to the room opened, everything stopped. The stove was gone and the noise ceased. Grandma asked Mom what she was doing to make so much racket. Mom couldn't talk. After a few minutes, Mom said that she regained her voice enough to tell Grandma everything. According to my mom, the worst of it came from her mother's reaction. Her mom's demeanour went cold. She stood up, and as she walked out the room, she just said, "Ignore it. It can't hurt you." With that, she left, closing the door behind her. When the door closed, everything started up again. At that point, Mom said she blew out her lamp and screamed to the room, "I am not afraid of you." She then buried herself in the covers and pulled her pillow over her head. She said the clattering went on for at least another hour before it finally stopped. For some background, well into my teens I had a lot of anxiety related to sleep and windows. Because as a child, up to the age of 4 or 5, my alcoholic neighbour would come home drunk and peer in through my bedroom window. Because of that, I could only sleep in rooms without windows, or which at least had blackout curtains. Likely because of this, I had a nightlight in my room until I was around 6 or 7 years old. At some point, my mom replaced my old nightlight with one that did not have a conventional bulb. Instead, the whole thing just glowed, casting a bluish light. I hated the thing, to the point that I would rather sleep in complete darkness, rather than have it plugged in. The blue light cast eerie shadows across the room. I took to hiding it, so my mom couldn't find it. On this one night, my mom had dressed herself for bed and put me to bed just before heading off herself. This was our routine. My mom had just left, shutting off the lights as she went, and I just rolled over. Because of my anxiety, it always took me a little while to settle in and get comfortable with my surroundings before I could actually fall asleep. Again, I just rolled over and was in the process of getting comfortable when I noticed my headboard was illuminated in blue light. At that point, I was annoyed. Stressed at, annoyed, not fearful nor anxious. I rolled back over, prepared to jump out of bed and rip the nightlight out of the wall. I had assumed my mom had somehow found it and plugged it in when I wasn't looking. The glow was not from the nightlight. When I looked to where it should have been, it wasn't there. Instead, there was a ball of blue light bobbing up and down in the centre of my room. It looked like a miniature blue sun, complete with a corona, but dim, maybe as bright as a cell phone screen. It was roughly the size of a softball. Now, up to the moment I saw the ball of light, my memories were crystal clear. My mum had just left the room, I had just rolled over and noticed the glow on my headboard, all within a minute, if that. I remember having 1 foot out of bed, getting ready to hit the floor. However, from the moment I saw the light, my memories became jumbled. The next thing I clearly remember was screaming my head off, except I was in bed, tucked in, face down in my pillow. I thought my mom would have come in immediately. She had to have been right at the door because she had just closed it. When she did finally come in, she had pillow lines on her face and she looked barely awake. Needless to say, she said it was a dream, but to this day I know that it wasn't. To be honest, I cannot say what it was. Back in uni, there was a girl who I used to fancy. She had an SUV, and we used to talk about random things inside her car while parked around campus. One night, we were parked underneath a large mango tree in a large parking lot. It's very dim, and the only lights are from the institute about 100 meters away. As we're talking, she stopped mid-sentence. In a very panicky voice, she asked if we could continue talking somewhere else. In her panic to flee the parking lot, she forgot to turn on her headlights. We were stopped by uni police for a bit. We parked at a different spot, near the main road where things are lit by lampposts. She then proceeds to ignore me as she switches the AC from warm to cold, back and forth. I asked her what she was doing. Apparently she was trying to fog up the windshield, to no avail. I asked her why, and she pointed at the corner of the windshield right in front of me. There on the glass was a small footprint, about 12 centimeters long, 5 toes, full heel. I panicked a little bit, thinking she implanted that earlier to prank me. I tried scrubbing it, but it was outside of the glass. We were obviously spooked. I asked if that was why she left in a hurry, to which she answered no. She said she saw a small hand on top of the windshield planted firmly on the glass. We just figured that parking lot was pretty haunted. Cut to a few years later, already graduated from uni and already working, my friend has a pickup truck as his service vehicle. One night, we were looking for places to eat. After dinner at a noodle store, we hop in the car as I noticed something. I didn't want to start on my friend, so I asked him to be calm when I told him. On the windshield is a small footprint. He freaked out a bit as he remembers a story I told him years ago. The footprint is small again and only visible when lit by oncoming traffic. We were both looking at it, and it is indeed a foot. This time I tried to scrub it again. My finger felt like swiping on dust. The footprint itself was made out of dust that seemed to coalesce to form a small foot. I was starting to freak out that maybe it's following me. About a year later, I was at a girlfriend's house. It's in a gated community in the woods. That night, we were watching The Shape of Water on their TV. I strongly advise not to watch it with your significant other's parents in the room. After the movie, we went upstairs to her room. As I carried her upstairs, I stopped and noticed something on the steps. The stairs were looking into the living room where we were. On the dust that collected between the rail posts were 2 small footprints. It was facing directly at the couch we sat on. It's as if an infant stood there watching us. No footprints leading to it, no markings leading out. It just appeared there. I never told the girlfriend this because she scares easily, and I don't want her to think that her home is occupied by unknown things. I've been hearing voices and different things in my home for about a month now. At first I thought I was just sleep deprived. I work night shifts as a nurse, or that my boyfriend was messing with me, but now I'm starting to get really freaked out. I'll try to explain things the best I know how. A little background. My boyfriend and I rent his grandma's house and live here with our big 3 dogs that bark at everything. The dogs will be important in a second, so just hang on. His grandma used to live there too, but she moved out last year, so it's just us 2 and the dogs. His grandpa died 2 years ago, and his ashes are spread in the garden in the backyard. My mum died 4 years ago, and we have her ashes in a box on our mantel above the fireplace. His brother died this year in January, a mile up the road after leaving our house. Our house is in a small neighbourhood that only has 1 street, and it's considered the country, but they're doing construction on the main road right by our house to build up the area, so it's not really the country anymore. The first time I can remember really hearing something that stood out to me was about a month ago. I was cleaning the house in the middle of the day while my boyfriend was at work. I usually play music pretty loud when I clean, but the dog started barking, so I walked out to the living room to tell them to hush, and they're all staring at one of our guest rooms. The door was closed and we never go in there for anything. It's barely a guest room, it's more of a place we keep random things that we can't find a place for. I walk in there and don't see anything, so just go back to cleaning. A little bit later, I hear a voice say, "Hi friend." I immediately freeze and walk into the living room and look around. I don't see anybody and the windows were all closed in the house. I text my boyfriend and ask if he just talk to me through a camera we've set up on our mantel. You can talk through an app and we sometimes use it to talk to our dogs when we're not home. And he said he didn't. And I look and our camera is unplugged. Then tonight I'm home by myself and my boyfriend is at a friend's house. I'm feeding the dogs and taking the trash out, just clearing up. I hear a whistle and then someone say hi. All the dogs' ears perked up and their heads all turn in the same direction. I text my boyfriend and tell him, and he tells me to get the dogs and go to our room and grab our shotgun and just wait for him to get home. He gets home and checks the whole house and backyard and doesn't see anything or anyone. There have been a few other things, but those are the 2 big ones that have made me truly scared where I go and sit in our room and wait for him to get home. We recently stayed at a newly remodeled resort north of Houston, Texas. We had a 2-room suite that included a master bedroom for the wife and I, and a separate living room with a pull-out couch for our 2 kids. The flooring was comprised of composite vinyl wood-look planks that made a distinct click and peel sound when walking barefoot. On the first night of our trip, I awoke before first light at around 5:30 in the morning to the sound of our children whispering in the other room. I also heard what sounded like 2 sets of feet walking gently around our bed. Anticipating an incoming prank, I sat up quickly to counter the attack, but was met with only a dark, empty bedroom and an adrenaline-fueled heart. The whispering abruptly stopped. I fell back into my side and groggily pulled the alarm clock into view. It was much too early for our late-sleeping kids to be awake, especially on vacation. I got up to use the restroom, and to my surprise, they were soundly asleep. While in the bathroom, I was thinking about what just happened and started feeling a bit spooked. I distinctly remembered that clicky, sticky noise coming from the floor and the clear sounds of 2 voices whispering. Was I dreaming? My thoughts then morphed to something even more unsettling. Someone may have entered our room. Someone may still be in our room. I opened the bathroom door, letting light fill the bedroom. Taking a good look around, I saw nothing out of place, nor any signs of intrusion. My wife gave me a grumble, so I shut off the lights, calmed my nerves, and laid back down with my back into the open room. The minute I stopped moving and my body was settled, I felt and heard a firm tap on the pillow directly behind my head, as if someone flicked it. Thoroughly spooked, I crawled into my wife like a small child while goosebumps travelled across my entire body. I told her what I encountered. She said that was really strange because she also heard the kids whispering around 3:30, asking them why they were still up and told them to quiet down. Without a response from them, the whispering stopped. She recalled it seeming weird because it didn't sound like them, but it was definitely coming from their room and felt mischievous. I got up and turned on multiple lights while swiftly doing a more thorough sweep of the securely locked room, checking beneath beds, in closets, and behind curtains. All to no avail. The kids continued sleeping right through the disruption. It took us some time to calm down after I clambered back to bed. I told my wife it felt as though there was an intruder in our room, but I couldn't find them. We contemplated many other possibilities, but couldn't identify a viable explanation for the occurrences. I don't focus on the paranormal and have had little to no experience with it throughout my 43 years on this earth. Not sure what that was, but it sure was strange. About 20 years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I worked as a window coverings installer in Sacramento, California. One day, I was sent with a large load of metal mini blinds to an active veterans hospital off Highway 50. I met the lead maintenance man, who thankfully loaned me a rolling cart to help make transporting my materials and tools a much easier chore. He then led me into the building, through a maze of corridors and up a large service elevator. As we exited the elevator, I was pleasantly greeted with a completely empty hospital wing. I was really happy to see that I had the entire floor to myself, no patients, staff, or furniture to constrain my mission. I could work quickly without obstruction or distraction. The maintenance man explained how they just completed some seismic retrofits while pointing to some newly constructed drywall columns that concealed the brunt of their work. He said they took the opportunity to make cosmetic repairs, install new blinds, and give the place a much needed paint job. He then showed me a typical patient room and said there should be one blind for every window on the floor. He told me he would leave me to it and give him a call if I needed anything or when I was ready to leave. Last thing he said in a concerned fatherly voice before entering the elevator was, "You sure you're going to be alright up here?" I responded absolutely in my best confident young man's voice. With a departing handshake, he entered the elevator cab. His question and its tone oddly hung with me as the doors closed and the whirl of the old elevator faded into a deafening silence. It was at that moment that I was truly able to take in my surroundings. With the elevator to my back, I scanned the hospital wing in a clockwise direction. I was standing in the middle of a long rectangular room, Light and airy patient rooms filled the perimeter of the open room to my left. As I scanned right, the light quickly faded into an inky, opaque blackness that disappeared into a dark, U-shaped corridor, which after a short distance made a sharp right and another sharp right to the end up back where I started. Despite the new paint, the place looked like it exited a time machine around 1950, with those pea green ceramic walls and matching asbestos vinyl floor tiles. It was at that moment I realised this place was creepy as fuck. But enough of that, I had a job to do and got right to work. First things first, I walked the entire perimeter to get a quick survey of where things were located, popping my head into each room as I passed. As I got to the dark hallway, my bravery waned. Due to the lack of light, I presume there must not have been any windows to address, but I pushed on nevertheless to be thorough. As the dark engulfed me, it felt like someone plugged me into an electrical socket. I had never before or since felt the energy that surged my body and immediately picked up my pace. Along both sides of the corridor were black rooms. After peeking in one, I abandoned my efforts for the absolute certainty that I was about to come face to face with something I didn't want to see. I began to full-on run the rest of the distance until I was back in the main hall. Luckily, there was only one room within the dark corridor that had a blind I needed to install. The entire time I was back there, it felt like I had 1,000 spectators, and I kept my eyes fixated on the doorway until I was done. The rest of my time in that wing, I was nervously on edge. The farther from the dark corridor I got, the slightly more at ease I became. However, I kept hearing distinct footsteps, bangs, knocks, a bucket being kicked and slid across the floor, muffled voices and a phantom intercom that sounded like an old movie. With 100% certainty, all these noises originated around me on that wing, despite there being no one present. With each noise, I would pop my head out into the main hall or say, "Hello?" in what I'm sure was an uneasy voice. About halfway through the install, I finally stopped reacting until I heard, "Hello?" "Cayucoast?" and froze. It was the maintenance man, and I was super stoked to see him. He asked me how things were going and if anything eventful had happened. Not wanting to sound kooky, I sheepishly brought up some of the noises I was hearing. He abruptly said, "No place, this place is haunted as fuck. I wouldn't work up here alone." He explained to me that the hospital had been an active war hospital dating back to the 1940s, and there had been thousands of deaths in the operating rooms that lined that dark corridor. He also mentioned that an electrician walked out earlier that week after something ran up behind him and growled. We joked around a bit to ease the tension, and then he left me alone once again. The rest of the day was surprisingly uneventful. Things seemed to have calmed down and I felt more calm. I do remember never feeling more relieved to leave a place behind, but also being completely exhausted that afternoon and crashing out to sleep early that evening. To this day, this remains the strangest experience of my life. So I'm laying in bed right now, and my cat was sat on the windowsill. I was playing on my phone, like I am now, and I heard someone walk past my bedroom door, but I thought nothing of it, as it's an old building, and sometimes it sounds like people are walking around, shuffling, even creaking, even though the hallway is carpet. Well, anyway, like I said, my concentration was on my phone when I heard someone whisper something I couldn't make out, and then a few pss 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 noises you make to a cat when you want them to come to you. I looked towards the window and noticed it was closed, so the noise did not come from outside. My cat jumped straight off the windowsill and dived straight onto the bed and climbed on me, but staring at the doorway next to the bed. I was unable to get her attention by stroking her or saying her name. She was just fixated with the doorway. There is a spooky part of the hallway that is always darker than the other parts near the bathroom door, where I feel like I'm being watched when I either go to or from the bathroom. Then I feel as if I'm being followed back to the bedroom. Once I saw a head peek around the bedroom door, but quickly disappeared when I took a look. No strange encounters happen in my bedroom, just the hallway. Also, sitting in the living room, you can see into the kitchen and out of the corner of our eyes, Both me and my partner have said it looks like someone walks past. Our cat is mainly chilled out, but sometimes goes absolutely bonkers, running around the flat, bouncing off the walls, as if she's being chased. It's a very old town I live in, with a lot of buildings dating back to the 1800s, maybe earlier. The downstairs used to be a shop. I don't know what shop, but it used to be, because the outside looks exactly like the other shops on the road, but ours has been redesigned to be 5 flats. We have a little gated community, with all the front doors round the back. It's in England, Cheshire. I've been having a few strange dreams at the moment, and my partner keeps having dreams of her friend that passed away 3 years ago. I've tried to look online about the history of the street we live on, but I found nothing. Same with the building. This happened when I was around 10 years old. We had gone to my nanny's house, my paternal grandma's, for our summer vacation. I'd say those 2 months spent in my nanny's house were one of the clearest memories of my childhood, especially because of this incident. In my nanny's village, we have those huge bygone plantation that give the look of a forest. In fact, these plantations began from my nanny's backyard and extended to a large land. Back then, they had bamboo plantations. Not now. So, around 1 month into our stay, there was a wedding in the neighbourhood. My parents, cousins, uncles, aunts and my grandpa were all occupied with it. After my elder brother was busy with our cousins and brothers. This left me alone with Nanny because I wasn't feeling well at the time, so Nanny stayed back with me. We were not practically alone. We had a few of my distant aunts in the house, but I didn't know them well, so I was glued to my Nanny. It was night time, the lanterns were lit and hanged on the poles of the front yard. A very dim bulb was lighting in one of the rooms. We had a cot made of bamboo in our front yard. Nanny sat on that bamboo cot with me in her lap. We could hear the muffled wedding band music from a distance, but the crickets' noise in the background was louder than that. Everything was shrouded with darkness, except for the area our lanterns lit. It was a perfect place for my 10-year-old self to fall asleep. Even though it was summer, the wind of the night did that easily. And so began my nap. I didn't know for how long I was asleep, but I woke up when I heard someone whispering in my ear. I thought it said my name. To be honest, I don't really remember what the word was, but I'm sure I thought it was my name back then. I opened my eyes and realised Nanny was not on the cot with me. Everything was the same around me, except I was alone on the front yard. Then I heard it saying something again. I stood on the cot to peek inside the house to see where Nanny went, and that's when I got it. I heard the voice again from the back of the house. I could also hear trees grinding across each other in the back of the house as if there was a storm, but the weather was extremely light that night. I decided to see who it was. I'm not even kidding, my 10-year-old self was stupid, I'd give myself that. I got down from the cot and headed towards the backyard. For context, you don't really have to get inside the house to go to the backyard. You can just pass the side door and you'll be there. I was really sportive back then and wasn't really afraid of dark, just like a normal kid. I took it as a game, thinking one of my cousins was calling me. I didn't even take a lantern. I decided to just walk and shout. Kia hai, what do you want? Down the path, I reached the backyard and began shouting. It was somewhat greyish dark in there. I shouted, Kia hai, again, and that was when I saw someone peeking from behind one of the long bamboo shoots. I'm actually getting goosebumps from thinking how clear that picture is in my mind till now. It was a black figure, tall to be precise, its height matched with the bamboo shoot it stood next to. I shouted the same thing for the 5th time. There was no movement from its side. The backyard that extended into large green land, dark at the time, suppressed all the noises. And as I said, the wind was strong in the backyard. Stronger in comparison to what the weather was on that night. I was now feeling a tinge of fright in my body. I could register how stupid of a decision it was to come here all alone. I didn't shout this time and tried to retrace my path to get back to the front yard. I took 1 step back and I swear I heard the rumbling of leaves, as if it was stepping ahead. I took another step back and it moved ahead again. I froze at that moment. I was scared shitless. I was heavily sweating by then. I shut my eyes tightly, and that was when someone grabbed me from behind. It was my nanny. with a lantern in her hand. She scolded me for going alone in the backyard. I opened my eyes and hugged her. I started crying and directed my finger towards the bamboo shoot. She took the lantern there and found no one. Whatever it was gone. She picked me up in her lap and took me inside the house. I was still crying. She told me she heard me shouting and followed my voice. Nanny freshened me up, and when I was able to talk, she asked me what that was all about. I narrated everything to her, and she asked me twice whether I was dreaming what I heard and saw and just sleepwalked in the backyard. I kept saying no in my defense. And then she told me she hadn't heard a child complaining of it in many years. She told me to never go back in the backyard ever again, even if it's noon. After I implored her continuously for an hour, she told me that it might be Baz Bamboo Ghost. She said it was a legend famous when she was a kid, and many children complained of being haunted by it. It only scared weak children, those who were easy to attack. It lures the weak children to its bamboo shoots and then makes them trip and fall. The concerning thing was that children could die by tripping on those shoots. She revealed that she heard of it last when she was a kid. And then after all those years, she heard it from me. She even debated to herself that it might have been a dream. We had other kids in the household and they never complained about it. She declared I was a really weak kid and I could have died that night. That's why she asked me not to go to the bamboo garden, even in noon. I couldn't sleep that night. I forgot about the incident with my nanny's impression of the possibility of it being a dream. But this left me with a perpetual fear of darkness. Just a few years back, we heard they got the bamboo plantation removed. That was when I got reminded of it again, and all the memories came flooding back. I looked it up and found a few legends about the Bamboo Ghost, famous in Bihari and Bengali culture. And the experiences were a striking match with mine. I don't even know what to say about it. It might really be a nightmare or hallucination. The clock just hit midnight, and I don't think I'll be able to sleep tonight with what happened. I'm normally pretty skeptical, but I just feel like this isn't something I can debunk, and I need to know what to do to feel more safe, because I think the spirit here isn't friendly. I think it's all related to the apartment I currently live in, because I've never had paranormal stuff happen to me before. Thankfully, I'm moving out in a month. I've been living here for 2 years now. The first red flag, the only thing the previous owners left me was a Ouija board, hidden in our bedroom closet. When I found it, I had bad vibes, and had to put it on my balcony so it was outside the place. After that, I felt watched at night and had trouble sleeping. Then things got back to normal, until the last few weeks. First, I was all alone doing some cleaning, and the light bulb in my kitchen completely exploded, leaving shattered glass all over the floor. Right after, there was a big bang on my fridge, like someone just hit it. Then I thought I heard something like a faucet running in my bedroom. I was already scared, so I walked super slowly to it. And then my bedroom door, right next to the bathroom, slammed itself, making an awfully loud sound. I was terrified and went to my mom's house for the rest of the day. I tried to tell myself it was just a shortcut, maybe a breeze from the open window that made the noise, but it wasn't even windy. It doesn't make sense. I've had trouble sleeping. Random objects found on the floor, and I blamed it on my cat. Until last week, I heard something wiggling an object and throwing it on the floor. I said my cat's name out loud to ground her, before I realized she was right next to me. And then, 2 days ago, my long mirror fell on my bed. It didn't break. It's a pretty lightweight mirror, so that I just lean on my bedroom's wall. I found it weird, but also it could have been the wind. But what just happened tells me it wasn't a coincidence. I was watching a horror movie for the first time in months tonight. I was really scared. All the lights were off. During the middle of the movie, I saw what looked like a shadow in my living room mirror. I brushed it off because I'm just too anxious. And then, boom. Before the end of the movie, the living room mirror that's been hanging there for 2 years decides to fall off. No open windows, no nothing. I'm surprised it didn't break, honestly. It was a pretty big fall. On top of that, my cat's freaking out and staring at some stuff I don't see. I'm so uneasy. I heard mirrors were like portals, so I took the 2 that fell and I hid them, facing the floor. I don't have sage to clear out the energy. What do I do to make this thing go away? To be safe? I know I only have a month left, but still. Many of you paranormal enthusiasts may have already heard by the word Nahul. No mistaking with Nahul, which is a native people here in Mexico, and I would guess that on also some other countries in Latin America. We call that way to people who can shapeshift into animals. Well, it was a cold night. I remember because it was really odd around that zone of the country. My parents' house is in a small town, and back in the day, it was one of the last houses on the outsides of town, so not many neighbours, but a lot of trees and nature around. The house has a long backyard, where we used to have sheep, and on one side, a small water stream, and trees to the side. Suddenly, the sheep started to bleat very loud, something we could call screams. My father then went to give a check on the window in the back side of the house. I still recall his face when he came back quickly, and smoothing his voice, he told to my mom, "Go ask your father and brothers to come here immediately." There were 4 brothers, my grandfather and my father. When everyone was there, a few minutes later, my father started to tell what he saw. In the barnyard, we had 10 sheep. At the moment my father gave a look, all of them were heaped just in one corner. At the centre, there was some kind of big animal. My father described it as a bear, which makes totally no sense. But he said it was big, hairy, and it seemed to be eating one of the sheep there. The one sheep was screaming really bad. Then, my grandfather told my mom to keep inside of the house and keep me in there also with her. If you go outside now, you may catch a bad air. Mal air in Spanish. So he made some kind of prayer, holding his machete. On his prayer, I remember he said the names of my uncles and also my father's. They went outside. My grandfather started to yell at the darkness, telling things like, "Go away, you have nothing to do here, leave this house." My father told me that he saw how this thing was in a pose, like eating the sheep, which was laying on the ground, still screaming by the way. And when my grandfather yelled at it, this thing seemed to stop and rise its head up towards my family. This being was only staring at them, not a single noise, also not red or shining eyes. Only the shadow looked like it was looking at them. So my father decided to do something at last. He took a big rock he picked up from the ground and threw it at this thing. Maybe not the best thing to do in this situation, but apparently this being was not that strong, or maybe because on our side were 6 men armed with machetes, but when the rock hit it, this being turned his back and ran away into the forest, running on 4 legs like an animal would do. This was when they came closer to the sheep. They saw how the sheep on the ground was still alive, but completely unskinned. It was horrifying to say the least. My grandfather sacrificed it to stop the suffering. After that night, a family friend who was known for being quite an old man, but still working on heavy farm labour, even heavier than young men, and that used to practice sorcery to heal people, told us a story about someone new in town that apparently was in Nahul. He told us he'd spoken to the man and asked him to leave the town. Indeed, we never happened to live something similar like that. I want to share this experience that happened to me around 15 years ago, when I started studying in a town away from my parents' home. There was one man, let's call him Tony, who was a good friend of my father. He helped him at work sometimes, hence I hanged out with them usually. When I was 17, I moved to a bigger city to start university, so I travelled every 2 months to visit my parents for long weekends or vacations. After my second year away, this friend, Tony, died from alcohol abuse. My father told me on a phone call how that happened, or at least how he heard it happened. Around 2 months later, on Dia de Muertos, Day of the Death here in Mexico, I went to visit my parents, also to go and visit the tombs of the family as the tradition goes. And at this point, I literally forgot about Tony's death. The apparition comes around because I didn't catch the bus that arrives during the day to my parents' hometown, so I was forced to take one that arrives there at like 2 a.m. It's quite a small town, so since I didn't find any taxi near the bus station, I decided to walk home. Around 5 blocks away from the house, I had to pass on a bridge where people say that a decapitated donkey spirit scares people during the night. I was a bit scared, to be honest. But then, suddenly this friend Tony, reached me on his bike. I didn't mention that he always moved on a bike, and asked me if I was just arriving from university. Maybe because I was originally thinking about the decapitated donkey, I completely forgot about the fact that Tony was supposed to be dead. So I started to talk to him, and he walked passing the bridge and a couple more blocks for around 4 or 5 minutes, talking about the school, the food in the other cities, stuff like that. Just 1 block away from my parents' house, he just told me, "Okay, I have to check some things over here," pointing in another direction. "But keep safe, say hello to your father for me." We said goodbye and then I got home. Since it was early morning, I walked directly into my room and waited until the next day to go and see my parents. It wasn't until the next morning, when I was just about to tell my father about Tony, that I remembered that he was already dead. At that moment I didn't tell my parents, but a bit later in the day my father told me he saw me arriving. He asked me if I was drunk or something because he saw me talking to nobody. So then I told him. I think it was some kind of company on that bridge that I was afraid of because of the stories, and also because of that scare from the donkey story. I didn't even pay attention to the fact that my company was someone I knew was already dead. It is kind of funny for me, and actually never felt afraid in the moment. So thanks to that old friend that was there with me, even after death. I suddenly awoke in the middle of the night, and there was a face with huge black eyes right in front of mine. I definitely didn't look human, and it didn't show any expression, almost mask-like. It also seemed to look at me at the same time, past me. It's kind of hard to describe. Because it was extremely dark, I tried to rationalize that what I was seeing must be my friend's cat. I remember that she once told me that a cat would often stare very closely at her face when she's hungry and wants food. I thought the huge eyes were simply the cat's face being too close to mine. Because I wanted it to move away from my face, I started to stroke it, just like I would do to a cat, and said Fiora, which is the name of my friend's cat. I could feel my hand touching it, but instead of fur, it felt like I was touching a person's skin. That's when I started to realize something wasn't right. My friend, who tends to wake from the slightest bit of noise and who thankfully happened to be awake at that same time, replied, "Fiora isn't here." The thing's face moved away from mine, and I realized that the eyes remained big. I sat up abruptly and became scared as I noticed that it wasn't my friend's cat. I then saw it move behind my friend's head and on top of a pillow. I told her to look at her pillow, still hoping that my mind is playing tricks on me, and that it's just the cat. My friend sat up, stared at her pillow. I can still see that thing sitting there, but she didn't see anything. I started to panic and asked her to quickly switch on the light, but that's when the thing disappeared. I insisted that we look around the room. The doors and windows were closed, so nothing could have entered or left the room, but I firmly wanted to hold on to the belief that it must have been the cat. We obviously found nothing, and my friend began to worry, as I was really panicking at that point. I tried to process what happened and was so confused by the fact that I was stroking someone moments ago. Sleep paralysis usually means being unable to move and feeling the sensation of being touched or having some weight on top of you, but this was the opposite. I could move freely, didn't feel any pressure on top of me, but I could touch the thing, and it felt like it was physically there. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Edit. I want to further describe the appearance of this thing, as many of you have asked what it looked like. It's really hard to describe, but I'll try my best. The face was a bit smaller than that of an average adult human head. The eyes were about 6 centimeters in height and a bit longer in width. I described them as black, but they also had a thin dark grey iris, about 3 millimeters in diameter, and large pupils. The eyes were slightly popping out of its head. It had a very small mouth, no hair on its head, and no ears. The skin was a muddy greyish colour and also covered with a few brown stripes. Once it moved to my friend's pillow, I saw that it didn't have a neck, but a thin body that was only about 1 meter long. The body itself had a pitch black colour, and it walked on 4 legs. A couple of weeks ago, I had a dream in which I was back at my parents' house and somebody knocked on the door. My grandpa, who's long gone for at least 10 years, went to get it, opened it, stood there, asked something that sounded like drum, and then suddenly, like in a freaking jump scene, a woman appeared right in front of me. Tall, pale, long black hair, dead eyes, 1 inch away from my face, and that's when I woke up. What's even weirder, this dream happened 2 more times, to the point where I was able to recognize what my granddad said,
and it was something along the lines of Daruma. I then googled it and I was creeped out when I found out about Daruma Samgakuranda, a Japanese game for kids, which is basically a hide and seek, but instead of seeking for your friends, you hide and a summoned ghost is looking for you. The creepiest thing about it is that neither me nor my granddad had anything to do with Japan. I've never heard or read about this subject before, but it gets worse. A week or so later, after the third and so far last episode, I've experienced something that I've later googled as night terror. I was sleeping and I woke up unexpectedly, feeling like somebody's arms were wrapping around my torso and arms and not letting go of me. I also felt like drowning and coughing, and the aforementioned kids game is also associated with falling, drowning, and also called a bathtub game. I jumped out of bed and only then I stopped feeling it. Up until that point, it felt so real, it's impossible to describe and for my brain to comprehend. I still can't believe how real and creepy that felt, but it gets even worse. The reason I decided to write this post is that while I'm dressing for the shower today, I've noticed 3 scratches on my right forearm. I don't recall hurting myself, banging on anything, or scratching against anything, and it only started hurting when I noticed it. I've always believed in the paranormal, in UFOs, possessions, etc., but I also never thought something as random as this would happen, like why something I've never ever heard of appears in my dreams several times, and then the extremely real night terror that happened a few days later is connected to it. I was babysitting my nephew, who at the time was 1.5 years old, a very active kid. You can't lose sight of him or you'll find him stuck in the oven. It was 3 in the afternoon and he always takes a little nap at that time, so I left him in his bed and closed the door. I went to the bathroom and when I came out I noted that the door was open, and I thought that he'd already woke up and he was making a mess in the living room. I called him and he answered me from the kitchen. I ran there and he was standing over the dining table. It's an old square wooden table, about 85 centimeters high, and my nephew was easily a few inches shorter. There were only 4 wooden chairs and they were turned over on the table. I put them that way to prevent him from using them to get on there. The chairs are heavy, even for me it's a bit difficult to put them like that. If he tried to move them alone, they could fall on top of him and hurt him. There is no way that he can move that chair alone without them falling on him, or the chairs falling to the floor, and there's no chance that he would get on the table by himself. But there he was, standing in the middle of the table, with the 4 chairs turned over around him as I had left them. He wasn't even scared, he just saw me and told me, "Toti, Toti." I asked him how he got up the table. I carried him and he kept saying, "Toti, Toti." I thought for a moment that this was some toy that he was looking for, and then I asked him, "What's Toti? Where is Toti?" And he turned and points to a corner in the kitchen, where there was no one or anything. I froze for a moment, and the first thing I thought was, is there someone in the house? Someone broke in and I put him on the table? No way, that doesn't make any sense. But either way, I grabbed my nephew, I took him to his room again, I checked the kitchen, the living room, the rooms, and nothing. There was no one in the whole house, besides us 2. I didn't want to think about the situation anymore. I just felt relieved that my nephew was fine, that he hadn't hurt himself in his little mischief. But I kept wondering, how did he get on that table? When my sister came, I asked her which toy he called Toti, and she told me that it's not a toy. That apparently was some imaginary friend that my nephew had, and that he'd been talking and playing for a week with him. I honestly hadn't planned to tell him what happened. I didn't want to get into trouble with her. I knew she would blame me and accuse me of leaving my nephew alone. But when she told me what it was, Toti, I told her everything. I didn't want to rush to think that it was something paranormal. I just told her how weird the whole situation has been, and she just told me, "You know how Joe's way is. He managed somehow to find a way to get on the table. That's why I always ask you to keep an eye on him. He might have hurt himself." And I thought, okay, she was right. I kept taking care of him, but I was starting to get a little nervous because I always saw and heard him playing with Toti. And one day I got a lot of courage and I asked him, "Where's Toti?" And he takes my hand, leads me to the kitchen and points to the same corner that he pointed out before. I freaked out for a moment, did my best to keep myself together, and later that day I waited for my sister and asked my nephew the same question, and he did the same thing, took me to the kitchen and kept pointing to the same place. For me, that wasn't normal. That was really creepy, to be honest. But my sister told me to just stop asking him about Toti. If I keep doing it, I only feed his fantasy, and that it wasn't good for him. So I just did what she told me, and I never asked about it again. After that, I started to have this weird feeling that someone else was there with us, but I just ended up ignoring the situation. I didn't want to suggest it to myself, so I took my sister's attitude and didn't think about it anymore. I convinced myself that it was nothing paranormal, it was just a child's imagination. He kept playing with Totty for a while longer until he grew up and didn't mention him again. That was about 2 years ago, and every time I remember that, I still wonder who was Totty and how he got on the table by himself. The doorbell rang after 1:30 a.m. The movie The Vikings with Tony Curtis and Kirk Douglas was on downstairs, music blaring while my mum was busying herself around. She was always a night owl, but this night she was up until my dad got home. They'd fought earlier, and he went out for the night with business associates. She was supposed to accompany him, but refused, so he went alone. I had just returned from looking for him. He had called just before 1 a.m. He thought it was my mom. He asked me to pick him up. I could tell he'd been drinking. "Stay where you are, Dad. I'm on my way." At 1:06 a.m., just as I'm walking out the door, he calls again. I'll be walking and waving my arms. He slurred on repeat. "No, Dad, stay where you are. I'm leaving now." When I got there, I couldn't find him. Every time I tried, I was pushed back by the blast of late December air. But there was a car turned the wrong way on the dark, rural 2-lane road with a rumpled up hood and the windshield busted out. Wow, I thought. They must have hit a deer. No cops yet, no ambulance. I got there before they did. I opened our front door shortly after I got home to a police officer and a minister. I'll never forget till the day I die the minister. His dark skin set off by his large, compassionate dark eyes that stared right into me, afraid for me, reaching out to me, knowing he was about to change my life. The officer asked me if my mother was home. Yes, I answered. If this is about my dad, I was just looking for him, I said with a casual, almost friendly tone to hide my apprehension. "We need to speak to your mother," was the officer's cut response. His "just the facts, ma'am" demeanour was more than matched by the compassion the minister gave me just by his full-on, profound stare. While I was hanging up my coat, I heard the minister tell my mom, "There's been an accident, and your husband's killed. He died at 1:11 a.m. Dad and Mom were 40. I was 19, home from school. It was just after Christmas." My siblings were younger and all still in school. The rest of the night was a whirl of hospital identify the body visits, the priest, phone calls, drives to the place he died and back again, and sitting around in disbelief. What do we do now? He was the most powerful man in the world. He was gone. We were adrift. It was a long time before I could sleep again. I think it was not until later that next night. People were calling, small towns, it was the headline on the front page that morning, "Pedestrian killed on XX road." I know because my boyfriend at the time and I ran out and bought the paper at dawn. Papers. I still have mine. People kept coming over bringing food, crying, needing comfort. The janitor from my former high school was the first person to call with condolences. Dad was very loved. We were very numb. Mom was melting. I had to step up. I finally had enough and went to bed. Everyone else remained talking downstairs. Mom was still up, so were siblings 2 to 4. I decided to go lie down in Mom and Dad's bed, on his side of the bed, and buried my face in his pillow. It still smelled like him. Lying flat on my stomach, I silently cried myself to sleep in the darkness. He's been dead now for about 24 hours. How is that possible? At some point I was awakened by someone sitting on the bed, stroking my hair. It was a real, genuine sensory touch, comforting, loving. I felt it from a dead, exhausted sleep state, no mistaking it. So real that when it woke me up, I reached up expecting to touch my mum's hand. Empty space. "Mom?" I said as I rolled over. Silence. "Mom, is that you?" Electric stillness. I reached out from the bed and waved my arm back and forth in the darkness. Nothing. No one. I sat up. "Mom?" Dead silence. Dead darkness. I got up, ran out of the room, and sprang to the top of the stairs. "Mom?" "Yes," she replied. "Were you just up here in your room trying to wake me up?" Pin drop. "No, honey," she said softly. "I just felt you rubbing my hair," I implored, almost begging. Pause. "It wasn't me, sweetheart," she said flatly. But it had been so real, it woke me up. I ran all the way down the stairs and just looked at her. We just stared. Tears started to well up in her eyes, then in mine too. We didn't say another word, we didn't have to. I turned away, staring at the floor, and just whispered to myself, "I love you too, Dad." My house was built in the 1950s, but the land had been in my family since before the Civil War. There was a farmhouse there before the war, which was burnt down. I live in the southern United States. So my house wasn't old, but the land and the history sure was. My ancestors were white farmers who helped run escaped slaves up north before and during the war. We've always been proud of our civil rights involvement. My grandmother marched in several demonstrations in the 60s. This is all just background info. Let's get to the apparitions. My great aunt was as sensitive, as was my great grandmother, and my mom, though mom wasn't as sensitive as the other women in the family. I got my sensitivity from these incredible women. I'm not psychic, I'm not esoteric. I can only tell you what I experienced growing up. My house was a 2-story with an attic and basement. It was a big house with so many rooms. My first memory of the paranormal was when I was in kindergarten. I was walking upstairs to my room when I heard an old radio show playing from another upstairs bedroom. Our guest rooms had old radios and TVs that didn't work, but looked very vintage and cool. I sat down and listened, laughing at the jokes. When I rose back up and took one step up, the sound stopped. So I went back to the step I sat on and heard it again. When I stepped down to the next step, it was silent. I could only hear it from that step. I didn't always hear the radio when I stood on that step, but that step is the only place I heard it. There was a ghost I would play with on those steps too. A little boy in brown short pants with brown shoes and a white button-up shirt. He would appear when I was going upstairs, hanging his legs through the banisters along the upstairs landing. He would laugh and wave. Sometimes he would get up and run. My mom played with the same child ghost when she was little. Sometimes, when I was in my room sleeping, the sounds of a small party of people would wake me up. It was coming from the room where I thought the radio I heard on the steps would play. I would listen to people laughing, hear them moving around, smell cigarettes even though no one in my house smoked. I would get fed up after a while and stick my head out the door. I would ask them to keep it down. I had school the next day. The ghosts would go silent after that. I would see a tall, sad black woman in my basement. She wore a long, simple brown skirt with a reddish-pink skirt. She wore a white scarf on her head. Sometimes she would be weeping in the corner. I asked my great-grandmother about that corner, and she told me that the old house had a hidden tunnel that my ancestors would hide slaves in. While our house wasn't in the same location as the old house, the tunnel ran right through the spot where we would eventually have our basement. My father painted a Mona Lisa, the first thing that everyone notices when they come at my home. It's a big picture that is sometimes in the living room, sometimes the dining room. At the moment it can be found on the wall in front of the large rustic wooden table on which we eat our meals. My father paints very well, but his Mona Lisa was not so much like the original. Her skin is darker, her clothes are completely black, and the background is green with yellow, illustrated with random drawings and phrases in Italian. However, there is something that he managed to reproduce perfectly, something that in my opinion is the essence of the painting. The eyes. They seem to stare at you as if you know all your secrets. There's kind of a legend about the original Mona Lisa, which says no matter where you are, she always looks at you, and I can attest that, in fact, it is true. Or at least it is here at home. No matter where or from what angle you look, she always seems to look you in the eye. The main reason why people show fear of the painting when they visit us. I confess, I almost feel a little afraid of it. My mother is also afraid, my aunts, my uncles. In short, everyone who has seen it. Why don't we get rid of it? Well, to start with, my father would never let us. After all, he was the one who painted it, and besides, we kind of got used to it. It doesn't bother us so much, so there's no reason to get rid of it. Once, something strange happened, related to the Mona Lisa, here at home. I remember it well, despite being around 8 years old at the time, because it was something that marked me a lot. Whenever we were going to travel for a few days, my aunt would keep a copy of the key to our old apartment. She lived in the apartment below, in order to feed our fish, or the poor fish would be dead by the time we returned. The aquarium was in the guest's bathroom, for some reason that I don't remember why, and to get to the bathroom it was necessary to pass in front of the living room wall, where the painting was. My aunt hated doing this, because she was terrified of the Mona Lisa, and claimed that the painting always looked at her whenever she passed by. One day she told me that, and I was slightly scared. I don't really remember if my father and I had left the apartment and gone up to ours, while my mother had stayed there talking to her. I just know that we were both in the kitchen, and I was afraid to pass in front of the painting before entering my dad's TV room / work room. He said it was silly and went there, no matter how much I protested. I stayed at the kitchen door while he passed in front of the Mona Lisa, and that's when I saw it. Her eyes, in which the black irises always rest on the right side, close in the corner, were moving to the left, following the rhythm of my father's steps. And as soon as he passed through the door, they quickly returned to their place of origin, as if they had never left there. Of course, I screamed desperately, stating that the Mona Lisa's eyes moved, but I didn't believe it for 1 second. The only thing I remember after that was telling my mother what had happened and hearing from her mouth that she too had already seen the painting's eyes moving that way. After that day, I never saw it happen again, and if it weren't my aunt and my mother witnessing it, I would have thought it was just my imagination. Back in 2015, my freshman year in college, my older sister and I became roommates and moved into a new home that she had bought. It was a nice home, fairly large for just 2 people. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 2 living rooms, laundry room, dining room and kitchen. Now my sister is about 12 years my senior, so I found it odd that she would want me as her roommate. Being that she was in her early 30s and in a much more settled time in her life, and I was the typical college party animal staying up late, coming home at random hours of the night, with the occasional guest. We were total opposites. However, she told me I wouldn't have to pay rent or bills if I moved in, so who was I to say no? Plus it beat living at the dorms at my university. Upon moving in, I only took a while to get a clue as to why she wanted a roommate so bad. As nice as a house that it was, that home had some creepy and uneasy vibes to it that I picked up on fairly quickly. Maybe it was the fact that the place felt big for just 2 people, but almost immediately, I felt like I was never alone in that house. Like something was always watching me. But I never expressed these feelings to my sister. Not right away, anyway. The first few things I started witnessing were the moving dining room chairs. My sister had this set of dining room chairs that were relatively heavy for what they were. Like you actually had to apply some force to move the things in and out of wherever you were going to sit. And because they had some weight to them, they made a very distinct sound whenever you scrapped the wooden legs against the floor when pulling the chair in and out. One day I was in the TV room watching Netflix. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening and I was home alone. That particular day had been a lazy one, nothing lounging around for me. I'd watched Netflix for so long that I was no longer paying attention to the TV, but was rather fixated on my phone, scrolling through social media while the TV played in the background. So I was much more aware of the background noise than I would have been if I'd been focusing on the TV. I was scrolling through Instagram and suddenly I heard a quick of the dining room chair being dragged. My eyes immediately focused towards the entrance of the TV room. Surely I was hearing things, right? I thought maybe my sister had gone home and had sat down without hearing her come in. But then again, this wasn't possible, as she'd told me that she'd be at work at this time. I got up to go check who was in our home, but almost immediately I heard a much longer and louder smack. This one was the one that made my hair stand up and caused my heart to start beating fast. The first sound sounded as if someone had bumped into the chair. The chair had to have been dragged in order to make that second sound. Although my heart was racing, I can honestly say that I was about 20% scared, 80% intrigued. I opened the TV room door and peeked around the corner of the wall that allows me to see out the room, through the kitchen and partially into the dining room. Fuck me! The farthest dining room chair was leaning up against the wall in the back of the room. Someone or something had dragged the chair out and bumped it into the wall, which explains the smack I'd heard after the second sound. I stared out into the dining room for about a minute and had goosebumps almost throughout that time. I decided that I would not leave that TV room until my sister came home, so I turned around, locked the door, and got back under the blanket I'd taken with me. However, the chairs did not stop creaking, and I could clearly hear them moving around from time to time for the entire 2 hours that I waited for her to get home. That was the first paranormal activity, if that's what you want to call it, that I'd ever experienced, not just at home, but ever. I didn't tell my sister for some odd reason that I don't understand looking back, but those chairs moving would go on to become the norm for me. I'd be in any room and I could hear them move. I'd somehow accepted the fact that something is moving those chairs, but never really feared the fact that it was happening. And so life in our home kept going. A couple months went by with the typical chair activity, when one night I got woken up by a voice calling out to me. I still remember the sound of that voice till this very day, and I'm getting chills just reminiscing about it in order to write about it for you guys. The day this happened to me was on the final day of final exams for the fall semester, so the previous night I had spent pulling an all-nighter for the final 2 exams that I had on that day. I got home and from school around 3 p.m, opened my closet, which was on the left-hand side of my bed, threw my backpack in there and collapsed onto my bed. I was out almost immediately. Now, I'm someone that never sleeps with my closet doors open. I've always found it creepy since I was a kid from all the scary stories, so I just grew up that way. I was so tired from my all-nighter that day, that I guess I didn't think about the doors being closed, open when I fell asleep. Fast forward, it's now late at night. I'd slept through the whole day and was still in a heavy sleep. I was in my heavy state of sleep when I suddenly heard a very stern whisper say, "Hey." That woke me up. I remember sitting up in a sit-up type manner on my bed and looking at my left, and that's where I heard the whisper come from. I look over to my closet and it's pitch black compared to the rest of my room, and I noticed that the door wasn't closed. I wasn't spooked at all at first. I was sitting up in bed, looking around my closet and the rest of the room. I finally decided that I must have heard the voice in my dream. I'm just going to go back to bed. I lay back down, rested my head on the pillow, and immediately upon closing my eyes again to go back to bed, I heard it again. Only this time wasn't much of a whisper. "Hey," it called out to me from the direction of my closet. I shot out of bed and turned on my lights. This time I knew I wasn't dreaming voices. I had physically woken up and sat up in bed. I'd looked around. I wasn't asleep. This voice was very real and it was trying to make contact with me. I looked at my phone and the time was 4 a.m. I finally mustered the courage to close my closet door and I eventually dozed back off to sleep. But that voice still lingers in my memory from time to time, and it's made me into a believer that the paranormal is, in fact, real. When I was 14, I had a strange encounter that still puzzles me to this day. On the weekends, I'd sometimes go to my mother's place. My parents are divorced. The house she lived on was converted into several small apartments. It was a creepy old farmhouse. The house was at least 150, maybe 200 years old. My mom told me off and on of strange sounds that she had been hearing and seeing things in the corner of her eyes, feelings of being watched. This one particular evening, I spent the night I brought my N64 because my mom would go to bed early and I'd still be up for a few more hours. I still remember to this day what game I was playing, WWF No Mercy. I was sitting Indian style on the floor, playing the story mode. I just finished a mission in the game and set down the controller to the left of me, behind me. Directly behind me was a recliner. I'll never forget what I saw next. I went to grab the controller and saw what appeared to be a hoof, like a horse next to the controller on the floor. Insects and blood were coming out of the silver that separated the hoof. I thought to myself, how strange. I slowly glanced up and this demonic figure was staring back at me. It leaned towards me, its face got down on my face and grinned the most evil smile. The eyes black, face red, one winged creature. Blood was dripping from its teeth. It was so surreal, I immediately went into a panic attack and blacked out. I learned later it was the fight or flight response. Several seconds later I came to, laying on the floor. I could barely move. The demonic figure was in the chair laughing at me. It was as if my fear and energy had been sucked dry from me. I lost all strength. I did all I could to crawl to my mom's room and woke her up. After I woke her up, we talked and she believed me. She told me that she too had seen the same thing earlier that week, but didn't want to scare me. I don't want to make of it all, and still think of it to this day. I've no doubt about demons and angels are real, and believe me, the last thing you ever want to encounter is a demon smiling in your face. When I was around 2 to 5 years old, my family used to live in a small apartment. We moved in our new home when my mum got pregnant. When we lived in the apartment, I didn't have a lot of friends since there were no kids my age living in the neighbourhood. There was no nursery in my small town, and obviously I wasn't old enough to go to school yet. So I used to play by myself and with my good friend Joe Bet. His name is relevant for later. The problem is, I was the only one who could see and speak with Joe, and Joe was a grown-up man. We used to play with my Hot Wheels and we talked together. My mum would sometimes hear me have a conversation alone in my bedroom and come by and check who I was talking to. but could not see anyone in the room. Every time I asked, I answered, with my friend Joe. Up to this point, it would have been a pretty normal situation for a lonely kid to get an imaginary friend, and I would have thought that myself too if it stopped there. But the things got a bit stranger when my parents bought a house and planned to move out. I remember some of my Hot Wheels moving alone and some of my toys getting in the living room when we were not home. My mum also told me recently that she started to feel weird in my room at that time, like someone was watching her. My dad doesn't remember anything weird except some of my toys getting out of my room when we were not home, but as he said, he wasn't home often with his work, so we may have missed some clues. We moved to our new home and everything stopped. At first, my mum assumed that my entry into kindergarten and me making friends was the reason why I didn't need Joe anymore. But the plot got even weirder. The other family who rented the apartment got in touch with my mom and started asking her questions about the apartment, and more precisely about my bedroom. Their son has got the same bedroom that I had, and like me, he started playing and talking alone in his bedroom. When his parents asked him who he was speaking to, he also answered, Joe. My mom told me that I did the same and answered the same when she questioned me about it. The only difference was his last name. I would always tell to my mom that his name is Joe Bett, and the other kid named him Joe Blow. In both cases, his name was Joe and his surname started with a B. It's a fairly strange coincidence if it is one. I still can't figure out exactly what was happening by that time, and if it was in fact a ghost or entity, or only just two lonely kids with a lot of imagination. At least Joe was a good guy and helped me get through my childhood. For context, I'll try to describe what our floor looks like in the jail. There's an elevator bay with a big metal door that is controlled by motor and chain. This is what we call the main slider. All traffic comes into the floor from this door. You go down a small passage and then you're in a space that is the shape of a square with a smaller square room inside called the cube, which is surrounded by 7 pods for inmates. Each pod has 12 cells and can fit 2 inmates. The cube is used for controlling doors and basically is an office space where paperwork can be filled out and where you can sit and watch the pods during your shift. I'm assigned night shift on a floor of non-violent inmates, Gen Pop. Typical inmate you'd find on this floor would be drug users, dealers, petty theft, and the occasional drunkard kind of deal. I was working this floor by myself and the night was starting off as usual. I show up, lock down all the pods for the night, conduct my head counts, and go back to the cube. An hour later I conduct my hourly block check. Everyone's sleeping or is chilling, so I return to the cube. Not the second I finish sitting down, I hear the sound of someone kicking a cell door. I get up and I start using my flashlight through the pods and eventually narrow it down to B pod 6 cell. One inmate is frantically screaming that his cellmate is coughing up blood and is shaking. I open the door, remove the inmate, and see that his cellmate is foaming from his mouth and is performing what is known as an agonal breathing. Essentially, we are listening to him take his final breaths. Long story short, medical gets called and he's eventually taken to hospital, but he doesn't make it to the hospital and is declared dead en route. Come to find out, the inmate had swallowed heroin before he was booked and one of the packages ruptured while he was in the jail. It was unfortunate, yes, but it's not the first time it's happened and surely won't be the last. I filed the paperwork and continued about life as normal. As another thing for context, we have cameras in the individual cell blocks, and cells we went back and watched the footage of the incident to confirm there wasn't any kind of assault or general rough housing that would have caused the packages to rupture. The next night I'm assigned the same floor. Similar process comes and goes. Show up, lock down the pods, conduct counts, etc. Hour goes by, I do my standard check, go back to the cube. Again, as I go to sit, I hear 3 loud bangs coming from what sounds like B-pod again. I go in, I flash my lights, everyone is sleeping or chilling. I return to the cube. 3 more bangs this time. I refer to my touch screen to see if the kicking is tripping the lock sensor on the door. Sure enough, B-pod 6 cell is showing that it is being messed with. The cell was still locked down due to the events of the night before, so no inmate should have been in the cell. I go to the cell, open it, and double check to make sure nothing and no one is in the cell. No one is in the cell. My next thought is that the lock is malfunctioning. I exit the cell and walk to the cube to call for maintenance, and as I'm on the phone, the door slams shut, which sends me back out to look. At this point I'm at a loss for words and have no clue what to do. All the inmates of the pod are also trying to figure out what is going on in their pod, and I'm trying to answer their questions, but genuinely I have no clue what to tell them. It eventually goes quiet, maintenance arrives, I have him check the lock. Nothing in terms of it being a mechanical malfunction. After that night, I asked my watch supervisor to be placed on a different floor, which at the time we had just got a new batch of rookies in, so he gave me my choice of the floors. I've been on my floor for a little over 2 years now, and I still have things happen that I can't explain, such as audible footsteps from around the cube, the occasional tapping on the glass of the door to the cube, but nothing as drastic as that night in 2018. My mother and her wife bought a big house in a small village in southern Sweden when I was younger. That's the house I grew up in. I never believed in ghosts or anything like that when I was younger, but that was about to change. I lived alone on the first floor of the house because it only had one bedroom on the entire floor. It was a big house and the rest of the first floor was a TV room, laundry and a big inventory. I have stories for days about that house that I will only tell you the most scary one, in my opinion. This encounter took place on spring, when I was in the 9th grade in high school. I always stayed up late at night watching MTV in the big TV room downstairs because I didn't care so much about school, since it was going to end in a few weeks and I'd done all my tests. One night when I was watching the replay of Jersey Shore, which aired at 3 AM in Sweden, I heard someone walking down the stairs. I thought it was my mom that was coming down to tell me to go to sleep, as usual, so I quickly laid down to fake sleep on the couch so I could blame the noises coming from the TV on that. But the footsteps didn't come closer. Instead I heard it go up again. After the steps came to the top of the stairs, it went down again. This repeated itself many times, so I went to check on who was walking the stairs up and down. To my surprise, I didn't see anyone walking the stairs, but the steps continued. I thought to myself, now I've lost it. I stood there beside the stairs and followed the footsteps up and down with my eyes. I thought I was hearing things that wasn't there because I didn't sleep much at the time. So I went to the couch, fell asleep, and I didn't think about it too much. When the alarm rang at 7:30, I went up to get some breakfast with my mom and brother. She asked me why I was scared my brother at night by walking so much in the stairs. I explained to her that I saw that night, but my mother, skeptic as she always was, angry at me because she didn't believe me. A few years went by, I had some more scary encounters, but she always blamed it on the wind or that it was an old house. I moved out of the house to study in a different city about an hour away from my hometown. Almost a year after I moved, I came home to celebrate my grandmother's birthday. On that occasion, my mother pulled me to the side and said, "You've always said there's someone else living in our house. How do you make someone like that disappear?" I saw in her eyes that she was frightened, so I asked her what had happened. She explained that the night before, she and my younger siblings slept downstairs because it was really hot upstairs. She woke up because it sounded like there was an intruder in the upstairs kitchen. She said she froze and couldn't move because she was so scared and prayed that the intruder wouldn't go downstairs. The sounds from the kitchen started at 3 AM and stopped somewhere between 3 and 4 AM. When she went to the kitchen in the morning, nothing was moved or changed. I told my mother, "I told you so, all these years and you never believed me." She said she was sorry and asked me where to go from here. I told her I had no clue, but that the house needs to be cleansed. She hired a medium and I can honestly say that the energy in that house has now changed. My old friends who had no idea that the house was ever haunted or that a medium cleansed it even said something felt different about the house. I lived and grew up in a haunted house, but it made me who I am, and I don't regret a thing, because now I know ghosts are real. A few years ago, my mum and I decided to take a road trip. We were going to different camping hiking spots along the California coast, and we were in the Big Sur area at the time of this particular incident. It was getting to be later in the day, so we had been sort of scrambling to find a campsite to sleep at. I can't remember the exact details, but for some reason we ended up going to this long, windy mountain road that seemed to go up forever. Eventually, at the top, we found a secluded site with camp spots and even a bathroom. We didn't see anyone around, but the sun was about to go down, so we figured we could find the person in charge in the morning and pay them then. By now, it was dark, and we'd been around the fire for a few hours. Our site was right at the edge of the trees. I heard some rustling coming from that direction and looked up. 2 people walking out in front of each other, dressed in all white, perfectly clean clothes. The person in front had their arm back to hold the other's hand, but they both looked straight ahead, didn't acknowledge me or my mom whatsoever. They walked out of the woods, past us, and right back into the trees. Here's what's weird. Both had no lights, were barefoot, had no belongings with them, and were not dressed warmly. It was probably around 40 degrees, pitch dark, and rough terrain. Not to mention the gut-wrenching heart-drop feeling when I saw them. I asked my mum if she saw that, and she said no, even though she was facing the same direction as me. I was on the edge of the rest of the night and had trouble sleeping. In the morning, my mom found the camp owner, paid him, and told him what I'd seen. He replied nonchalantly, "Oh yeah, those are the night walkers. People see them around here sometimes." When she asked him if he thought it was paranormal, he said he was pretty damn sure. Got the hell out of there as soon as I could. I was a dumb fuck as a kid. I did a lot of ridiculous shit. But this encounter, just let me tell you, I learnt my lesson about breaking into places. That really should be left alone. I was in the middle of the summer. Me and my friends sat on a wooden fence smoking cigarettes, thinking about what the hell to do with ourselves. One of my friends suggested an abandoned hospital up the road from my house. We were unsure at first as we'd heard a lot of stories from people who had previously went years ago before it was boarded up again. After much discussion, we went. It was boarded up with wood nailed to the windows, the doors were sealed shut, so there was no way we could have gotten in that way. We were going to walk away and just go home, but luckily I remembered I had something at home that I could get the boards off with. As we climbed through the window, we finally got in. It was like going through a time warp. The place wasn't heavily damaged and the interior looked like it was from the 70s or 60s. There were still stale bloody towels there too. It was eerie as hell. Anyways, we fooled around, freaked each other out for a few hours until we had to go. Before we left, we fucked around with a fire extinguisher that had been left there. While everyone was in the centre of the hospital, I stepped out for a breather in the hallway, with the window we entered through. I was at the bottom of the hallway and I saw a pale, slender figure in a blue hospital gown climb out of the window while looking at me. He looked tired and sick. I froze and screamed. I left as soon as it happened. I will never forget how freaky it was. So let me start off by saying that I'm a huge horror movie fan and I've seen all major horror movies out there. I pretty much only ever watch horrors in my spare time and like watching anything paranormal. I find it very hard to be genuinely scared and most horrors don't really scare me. So I was looking for a decent horror movie to watch and I'm mostly into demonic, paranormal horrors. I came across a movie called The Dark and the Wicked. I looked it up on IMDb and it had a fairly good rating, so I thought I'd give it a try. I started watching it around 1 AM, and after I finished watching it, I was like, fuck, that was a really scary movie. This doesn't happen often and it freaked me out a bit. My wife was sleeping and I quietly got into bed because I didn't want to wake her up, but she woke up anyway. She asked me what time it was and it was almost 3 AM at that point. I told her I watched a really scary movie and it freaked me out. She pretty much told me to shut the fuck up and go to sleep. She can't watch or listen to anything remotely scary. It's been like 20 minutes or so I'm in bed, trying to sleep, and all of a sudden I hear an alarm go off. Initially I was thinking it was coming from my neighbour's house, but then it sounded closer. My wife woke up and she said it could be the car alarm. I looked outside and it wasn't the car, so I thought I'd go downstairs to check it out. The fire alarm was going off. So I put the light on and went to the kitchen and there was no smoke. I went into the living room and there was no smoke. All the appliances were off. I didn't think much of it, so I turned the alarm off and went back into bed. I told my wife and we didn't make anything of it. I tried to go back to sleep again and it must have been around 30 minutes or so and I heard the fire alarm go off again. I did the same thing, looked all around the house, no smoke, all appliances were off. I did not have any explanation of it. I took the fire alarm off the ceiling and checked that the battery was low, and this was one of the reasons why it would go off. This particular fire alarm, you can't change the battery. It had an expiry date and it ended in 2028. I didn't put the fire alarm back on the ceiling and threw it in the bin. I went back to bed and needless to say my wife was pissed. She was like, "I always tell you not to watch these types of movies at night." We're Muslim and she thinks that if you watch movies with demonic shit in it, it can bring negative energy to the house. I thought that was bullshit, but after that day, I have second thoughts. I'm still going to watch horror movies. I just find it crazy how we've lived in this house for 3 years now and nothing like that has ever happened before. It could just be a coincidence, but it made me think. I've had friends who have told me that similar things have happened to them in the past. So I've experienced some really unusual, interesting things throughout my 26 years of living, and a few of those memories just won't give me peace of mind. Some of my earliest memories go back to the very first apartment I lived in with my parents. We moved quite a bit, which I only recently discovered was when I was only 1 year old. When I brought those memories up to my mother, she was shocked that I could remember the apartment and the gatherings my parents would hold there with so much detail, saying we moved out of the apartment before I turned 2. That apartment is also my first vivid memory of what I've always believed to be a ghost encounter. It was a one-room apartment. There was a small hallway going from the main door to the kitchen, with our bedroom and living room on the left, and the bathroom shower on the right. There was a vent up on the wall that for whatever reason always gave me the creeps as a child. My parents and I shared the one room, with me sleeping on a small couch and my parents sleeping on the floor. Everything was covered in carpets everywhere. Well, we did live in Ukraine. One night I'm slowly shaken awake by someone, and as I open my eyes expecting to probably see my mom, I notice the hands are the palest white I'd ever seen in person, with long sharp nails. I look up, and looking down on me is an extremely pale woman, long straight black hair, dressed all in black, with a black veil covering her head and most of her face. I don't remember being scared, but I remember her very vividly. She just looked at me for a long minute, then turned and walked away. And from there, the rest of the memory gets foggy. Fast forward to age 16, now living in Israel. My father, being a strong Christian, wanted to live on the Holy Land. I'm hanging out with 2 friends when one of them suggests we use a Ouija board to try and summon some spirits to chat. Not knowing any better, I agree. We made our own board with letters, numbers, and yes, no on a piece of paper, since we didn't have an actual board. And friend A offered to use her ring as the circling piece. Friend B didn't want to join, so she decided to wait outside the room. Both friend A and myself placed a single finger each on the ring, and friend A started calling out different names of famous dead people, hoping someone will respond. After a number of failed attempts, I got a bright idea. I tried calling the ghost I saw as a child. I didn't know her name, but her image was very vivid in my mind, so I figured why not try to concentrate really hard on what she looked like as we're trying to summon her. Maybe it'll work. Lo and behold, the ring started moving. I was skeptic, thinking maybe my friend was trying to pull a prank on me and pulling on the ring, so I paused and managed to convince friend B to join, asking her to help me stop friend A from trying to mess with me. We decided that we both will press down on the ring as hard as we can, so that friend A won't be able to move it without proving she's messing with us. That did not go as planned. The more we pressed down on the ring, the faster and more fluidly it moved, like it had a life of its own. It answered all our questions, claiming to be the spirit of a dead woman who was brutally killed at the age of 26. Her name would probably be Abella or Avella. We did use Hebrew letters for the board, so I'm not sure how it would be pronounced. It even mentioned a vague section number where she's supposedly buried. I was innocently thrown in jail 10 years ago. I already was in a strange situation with my daughter's father, and we were fighting over a custody agreement, and I thought for sure this could be used against me to have her taken away. Not to mention, it was people I loved and I thought loved me who orchestrated this jail fiasco. So it's fair to say that I was at a low, probably the lowest point in my life. Betrayed by people I loved, and the one thing I'm proud of in my life may be taken away. I was out late Saturday, got a hotel room and decided to get my favourite appetiser at a local bar and have a glass of wine to chill my nerves the following Sunday. I couldn't even take one bite. I love to eat and have never ordered something and just not taken a bite. I couldn't even eat a crumb. I decided to get the ball rolling and find a freaking lawyer, because I knew I would need one, to keep my daughter, to prove I was erroneously thrown in jail, the cops lied, for slander, people I loved told lies. There was a myriad of reasons. I was in my car outside the bar, trying to call this lawyer. It was Sunday, so I thought I would just leave a message. It stopped ringing one time. I call back. The voicemail never picks up. But something else does. It's a raspy, deep voice, and it's yelling at me in another language, going on and on. It was not like it was French, Italian, or Spanish, all I slightly know. It seemed archaic. It wasn't human. It hung up on me.
I also instinctively knew it was something trying to just finish me off, wanting me to think I was crazy hearing voices, wanting me to commit suicide or be committed to a psychiatric ward. I instinctively knew what it was doing. Honestly, I've been suicidal before on this day and the closest I've ever been to feeling that way again, but I did not get scared and spiral down. I dialed it back. I wanted it to yell at me again. I wanted to tell it I was not scared and that he will not win. I wanted to tell it to leave me the F alone. I dialed it back about 5 times and just got the answering machine, although it seemed jumpy and weak, like he was there. He never came back. In fact, just knowing there was a force out there that wanted me to spiral down again gave me strength. I was able to put one foot in front of the other and go back to the hotel, get a snack, gathered myself. I got stronger from there. Turns out the father couldn't do anything about it in court. Everything ended up just fine. It was expunged, although I still do not talk to a family member over this, and I'm happy with my daughter. I also am no longer afraid of anything, which is weird because I used to not be able to watch demon movies at all. I watch them alone now. Nothing scares me. You can see how it would have been so easy to spiral down. Think I was so crazy, thrown in a mental institution, for real, have my daughter taken away, being suicidal. But in that instant, I flipped for the better. When it's all said and done, I don't think it was a demon, but an entity just trying to scare me. Perhaps the same one that was trying to bring me down growing up too. If I didn't believe, I would have spiraled down. You really do have to believe in this stuff first, then not be scared of it. This happened a couple of years ago in Manchester, UK. I lived in the north of the city, in a town called Bury, and worked early hour night shifts at the airport. I'll put the real place names on here for anyone that would like to Google the areas in question. Anyway, one early morning in winter, around 2 AM, I set off for work. Around this time there was intermittent overnight roadworks on the motorway, which would send you off to a junction without warning, diverting you back onto the motorway further down. And this night was one of those taking me off at Worsley and sending down through Worsley, skirting near Eccles towards Manchester's large shopping mall, the Trafford Centre. I knew the area, having lived there a few years previously, but this time of night seemed unusually quiet and deserted on the roads. Normally, I'd see the odd person drunkenly staggering down the street, or late-night taxis scurrying around. But tonight, nobody was on the streets at all. I drove down Barton Road, which, to my left, is followed by a dark canal, which was mist-covered, and slowed my car up to the red light at the intersection, just before you cross an old Victoria-era swing bridge, Barton Swing Bridge, which crosses the River Mersey below. As I slowed to the lights, I suddenly became overtaken with an intense feeling of dread and panic. The hairs on my arms stood up, and I broke out in a cold sweat for no reason. I had this feeling like a smackhead or someone was going to jump out of a nearby bush and jump my car. Then, as cliche as it sounds, my car radio suddenly cut out, and the only noise was my idling car engine. The lights turned green, and I suddenly didn't want to go through them, over the darkened swing bridge that loomed ahead of me, almost like it dared me to cross it. I swallowed hard and nervously put my car into gear and crept forward across the junction. The bridge clanked and seemed to groan as I moved hesitantly over it, then followed the curve of the road around a sweeping bend to the left, then to the right, with nothing but tall, dark trees leaning over the road on either side. Around the bend on my driver's side, the right in England, is an old monastery, and through the gates of the monastery, I could make out the shape of a dog, about to cross the road in front of my car, so I slowed. This dog was huge. It was black. It actually looked muscular from its outline. As I completed the bend, my headlights hit this dog. All I can describe it as, my headlights hit nothing. No reflection off its coat, no details, just like a void, a shadow. This dog turned to me and its eyes glowed yellow. Not reflections like you get off a cat or a fox, they glowed. This beast then ran across in front of me. It clearly wasn't a dog. It ran an emotion that wasn't a dog. As ridiculous as it sounded, it seemed to run in a jerky motion, like the really bad CGI motions of old Sinbad film sea monsters. I followed this beast till it ran to the side of the road and out of my headlight beam, and seemed to completely vanish from sight. I looked in my side windows, side mirrors, rear mirrors.
Nothing. As my car rolled around the next bend in the road past this monastery, the car radio suddenly blurted back into life, startling me. That feeling of dread lifted, as this thought randomly came to me. You wasn't meant to see that. It wasn't for you. I felt completely normal, but absolutely perplexed by what had just happened to me. When I was around 8 years old, I first met my 3 friends who moved to the neighbourhood, which we have lived in for the past 20 years. The circumstances of them moving to the neighbourhood was loosely told to me growing up by them, but as they were kids at the time, they didn't really remember exactly what happened. A couple of months ago, I was at my friend's house and we were talking about paranormal activity we've experienced. That was when my friend's mother sat down and told me in detail what happened in their old home, which made them move to the neighbourhood. I knew it was crazy, but I didn't expect to hear what I did. I will try my best to detail all the things she told me. Apologies in advance for the bad spelling and grammar. This all took place in the early 1980s. As a young couple with a baby, they were looking for a council house. Council house is a form of public or social housing built in by local municipalities in the United Kingdom, around the Nottingham area. They came across a neighbourhood which they wanted to live in and looked around the properties there. They were then informed of a house in that area which had become available. When they went to visit the house, they noticed that the door to the basement had been bricked up. The other houses in that area all had access to their basements. They thought it was odd, but nevertheless nothing concerning. From what I was told, the first couple of years which they lived in the house, nothing happened. It was just a normal house. The father was still studying electrical engineering, and the mother was a housewife. By this time, they had 2 more children. Later on, one of their neighbours who frequently visited the house told the mother that she sensed a bad spirit in the house, and they should get the house blessed. They didn't do so when they first moved in. My friend's mother agreed, but told me she regretted it deeply as all hell broke loose after that. She thought the events that transpired were caused by the blessing. The first thing which started to happen was, my friend, who was the oldest at the time, started to become restless at night and complain that something was scaring him. My friend's mom thought it was just normal, as he just moved into his own room for the first time. But this started to become a daily occurrence, and she started to worry about him. It became that bad that he refused to sleep by himself. He said he saw a black woman with long fingers and frizzly hair in his room. Eventually, all 3 brothers would sleep in the same room. Later, they started to hear scratching and knocking noises in the house. The way she described the noises was like ticking on the windows and scratching noises in the corner of the rooms. This would last for minutes. She couldn't understand where exactly the noises were coming from. As the months went along, things became increasingly strange. She told me how they started to smell rotten fish throughout the house, and then it would just suddenly disappear. My friends, who were the oldest and youngest, were the ones who were greatly affected by the events in the house. The middle child had become attached to the spirit. He would frequently play by himself and talk to the spirits when his brothers weren't around. Later on, the father started to become a target. My friend's mom told me there was an instance where he punished the 3 boys, and especially the middle child, for doing something wrong. Later that night, he had a dream of getting chased by a demon dog, which ended up biting him. He woke up the next day with a giant bite mark on his chest. One of the most frightening things which she told me was that, at night, she felt that something was standing near the windowsill, and then it would jump on the bed, and then jump back on the windowsill. She would get up and start to pray as the bed was shaking, and it would eventually stop. They would also start to hear sinister laughing throughout the house, as if something demonic was taunting them. There were also instances where she saw paw prints on the kitchen floor as if a dog had been walking around. Only problem was that they didn't have a dog. They asked one of their uncles to house sit for them as they took the 3 kids for a day out. They wanted to get their minds off the events and have a normal day for a change. The uncle was told of what was happening in the house, but he was a skeptic. He said he would deal with what was in the house himself while they were gone. Later that night, when they arrived home, they were shocked to discover the front door wide open and all the lights in the house on. They phoned the uncle and asked him where he was. He told them that he challenged the spirit in the house and was thrown across the room. He started to hear laughing, at which point he ran out the door. As you can imagine, things became very desperate, so they contacted the local council and informed them of what was happening in the house. Eventually, a woman from the council came to visit their home to reassure them that they would do something to make it better. My friend's mother later learned that the woman who came to visit ended up in hospital with a mysterious illness and later refused to go anywhere near the house again. The meetings which they had subsequently all took place in a pub, which was half a mile down the road. Thankfully, the council found them another house, on the street where we live now. On the last day, when they were packing their things into the car to move out, the middle son was walking in the house by himself, without a care for anything. He was the only one who didn't want to move. The family later discovered that numerous couples had left the house after their departure. No one stayed in the house for more than a few months. After doing some research, they were informed by local people that a black woman with a dog had committed suicide in that house. From what I understand, the house is now a part of a Chinese takeaway. So I came home on lunch break yesterday, and the candle on my living room coffee table was lit. I know I didn't light it, and I walked by it on my way out of the house in the morning like I do every morning to go to work. When I saw it, I went over, said thank you to the candle, and blew it out. It kind of freaked me out a little, and I was concerned someone was messing with me, so I checked all the locks in the house and made sure nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place, and I called all the people that had spares to make sure none of them had been in my house and lit the candle. So I'm sure people are going to ask, and before I even say this, no, I didn't forget to blow it out. The reason being is that I have this weird thing where when I blow candles out, I always say thank you out loud. I don't know why I really do it. It's just something I started doing when I blew out candles while living alone. But anyway, I distinctly remember blowing out the candle the night before, and I remember it was particularly hard to light in general because it's in a deep jar. It's in one of those prayers candles you find at the grocery store. So I used a spare birthday candle I had left over to stick down in the jar and light it. While it was lit, I was painting at my kitchen table, and at some point I got up, said thank you, blew the candle out, and resumed watching Twitch and painting. I checked online to see if candles could relight themselves, and people said they could given the right circumstances. However, I'm sure it was going out before going to bed. Furthermore, my neighbour has a security system with a camera that points at my driveway, and during the hours when the candle had to be lit, no one had come or gone. This happened 2 weeks ago, and I can't stop thinking about it. I was sleeping, then I opened my eyes because the noise was bothering me. The noise was something was running in my room. I was still sleepy, I didn't realise it yet. I thought I had sleep paralysis, but nah. Then it got louder, and the running became faster. I was like, what the fuck? I don't have any pets. My house is clean, there ain't no rats or nothing. It was too dark, I couldn't say anything. I swear I got so damn scared. I started saying some prayers, and then suddenly the noise stopped. Then I felt this super cold air. It was so weird, I felt like there was a wind going counterclockwise motion. I can't explain it. Anyway, it was in front of my face. At this moment, I knew it was something scary, something supernatural. So I closed my eyes so damn hard, I was terrified I didn't want to look. Then this thing whistled at me. It was like a tune whistle, not just any normal whistle. I quickly grabbed my phone and switched on the light from the smart app. When I checked the time, it was 4 a.m. I did encounter strange things in the past, but it wasn't something like this. Like once, I was sleeping and a kid woke me up by tapping my shoulder. I still remember what he was wearing. He was wearing striped t-shirts and knee-length blue jeans. Right now, I can't get the whistle tune out of my head. I don't intentionally whistle it out loud sometimes. This happened in 2001 when I was 13. The foster family I had just moved into was selling one of 2 old people's homes they owed. This particular one just so happened to be supposedly placed on the boundary lines of the old Templar kingdom of Walsingham. Not my words, but foster mothers. As it was located in a rough area of Leeds, Yorkshire, After all residents were moved to different care homes, staff laid off before the sale completed and money changed hands. My then foster mother, her ex-care home manager, friend, and myself decided to spend the night to make sure all cleaning done, all items, knickknacks removed by removals, no damage to property, etc. The initial plan was I was to sleep in a camp bed in the living room, foster mother and her friend to sleep in a nearby ground floor room. Upon pulling into the driveway, I can only explain I got bad vibes, spidey sense, neck hairs tingling, off the place. Mid-October, early evening darkness. Anyway, I got out of the car and upon walking up to the front door, I can only explain it as seeing a black cloud or amalgamation of moving darkness through the living room window, correlating in the left-hand corner of the room. This furthering my bad vibes, I stuck close to foster mother and her friend, as we ordered the basic chores before bed. As the room they were sleeping in had twin beds and was quite big, I asked if I could sleep on the floor so as not to be on my own. Surprisingly, they agreed. TV on until time for sleep. Foster mother and her friend were fast asleep. I was drifting into sleep between half sleep, but not what time when I was on my left side, right ear on the pillow, left ear up. I heard as though it was directly in my left ear a few seconds of loud sniffing, and I could feel the breath on my ear. As I opened my eyes, slowly, it was then I heard the most loud, inhuman, blood-curdling scream of a woman. I imagine woman as it was too high-pitched for a man. Then silence. My eyes opened, I jolted up, terrified. What was 30 seconds looking at both foster mother and her friends sound asleep. Seemed like an eternity. I screamed, "What the fuck?" My foster mother and her friend woke up to me in tears, explaining the scream as they did best to console me, and said, "Go back to bed, we'll talk in the morning." I couldn't go back to sleep. All I could do was try and rationalise. Yet I could hear a faint clang, clang, clang coming from beneath the floorboards, almost like mining. To be fair, the next morning during last-minute chores and waiting for removals, they listened intently, tried to rationalise it, and make light of the ordeal while consoling me. Eventually they tried to make a joke of it as if they knew by how I looked I was telling the truth, which worked after a few days. After we left the next day after papers were signed, I was told apparently other staff had heard the same thing over the 20 years there had been a care home. I found out a rich family bought the place to be used as family home, and I remember 2 weeks after this ordeal, calming down, I asked if the new owners were told it was haunted. I got a grin and maybe. I have lived in this house with my husband and 2 teenage sons for 2 years now. Every one of us has heard the same thing, time after time. When sitting in the living room at night, you can hear what sounds like someone pacing back and forth on the front porch. Sometimes there will be light knocking on the door and the walls. When we check, no one is there. No wild animals, nothing that could explain the noise at all. We have kind of made a joke out of it. Oh, the ghost is back, haha. None of us are really true paranormal believers, although I am open to the possibility. Just skeptical. I want to explore all options before jumping to conclusions. Well, my mother has been staying with us for the past week and has been sleeping on a pull-out bed in the living room. She tells me that it goes on all night long and can actually get pretty intense. We are all always in our bedrooms at night, on the opposite side of the house, so we had never really experienced what she said. About an hour ago, my mother and I are watching a movie in the living room, about 10 PM where I live. My husband had gone out and the kids were playing Smash Bros in the back room. We had heard the pacing a few times and talked about it a little earlier. There was a few minutes of quiet and then 3 heavy, distinct knocks on the front door that sounded just like my husband had come back and had his hands full of groceries. So I reach over and open the door, still looking at the TV screen, and say, "You're back, come on in." Only no one comes in. We stop the movie and I look around outside. Nothing. My husband isn't back yet. Nothing else is around. My mum tells me again that this happens every night. I've never heard it so distinct, but she tells me it's happening every night. She then says, sort of jokingly, "I think there was someone out there that wanted in, and I think you just gave him an invitation." At this very moment, as soon as that proclamation left her lips, the light bulb flickered about 5 seconds and then blew out completely, leaving us sitting there in the dark. We both panicked for a few seconds and then kind of tried to laugh it off. We restarted the movie we were watching, and for the rest of the movie, we heard no creeping around outside. I don't want to admit it, but I am feeling scared right now. I went to the bathroom and one of the bulbs in there had done the same flicker, but it didn't burst like the other. This isn't something that has happened before. It's not a wiring problem, at least not one that existed before the incident. From the time I was born until I was around 6 years old, my family and I lived in a townhouse close to the city's community college. It wasn't particularly old, and as far as my parents knew, the house had no dark past to speak of. There's a good chance the house was built on old farmland. I can explain this more in a second post if needed. And there was certainly a Native American presence in the area not long ago, but the house itself was totally normal. My parents moved into the house in 2001 and hadn't had anything out of the ordinary occur until after I was born, sometime around late 2004 to early 2005. This is the first odd experience my family had in the house, as told to me by my mom. My mom was very close friends with her supervisor. We'll call her Christy. Christy was over at our house quite often, since my mom often consulted her for help with her work, and she would usually bring her son over to play with me. On this particular day, it was just her. My mom and Christy were down in the kitchen, talking at the table. My dad was upstairs in one of the bedrooms, changing my diaper. My mom got up to use the bathroom, which was just across the hall from the kitchen by the front door, and Christy stayed at the table. As my mom was in the bathroom, out of nowhere she hears a woman's voice she doesn't recognise say something along the lines of, "Hello, handsome." My mom, thinking a neighbour has come over to say hello, thinks nothing of it, and when she comes out of the bathroom, she asks Christy if anyone's over. Christy looks at my mom, baffled, and tells her that no one else has entered the house, and that she hadn't heard the woman's voice. As Christy and my mom look around the house, puzzled, my dad comes downstairs holding me and asks, "Who stopped by to say hello?" He'd heard the same woman's voice. No one could figure out where the voice had come from, or how both my mom and dad, on two separate floors at that time, had both heard the same voice. Christy told my mom she got a weird feeling in the home, but my parents just wrote it off and figured it was just a strange coincidence. This proved to only be the beginning. It was around this time as well that my mom began capturing these strange balls of light in every picture she took in the house. Now my mom acknowledges herself that capturing a picture or two containing an orb is nothing out of the ordinary, considering orbs can be caused by dust and tricks of the light, but this was different. These orbs were appearing in every picture she would take. My mom cut the camera straps off her cameras, tried using disposable Kodak cameras instead of our digital one, got the house deep cleaned several times, took pictures in different parts of the house to avoid light contamination, and even bought an entirely new digital camera, but the orbs still appeared in every single photo. There are hundreds of photos sitting in albums in our living room with these massive orbs in them. These orbs show up again later in the story, but for the sake of trying to keep the timeline straight, I'll table this part of the story here. My mom hosted a group for mothers of young babies at our home, and Christy also happened to be a part of this group. One day, the group was over at the house and seated in a circle in our living room, when suddenly Christy looked up towards our couch and screamed, pointing towards it. She looked at my mom in a panic and shouts, "There is a man standing behind your couch." The rest of the group looks over and sees no one there. It wouldn't have been possible for there to have been someone behind the couch anyway. The couch was pushed up against the wall. Christy grabbed her son and ran out of the house, and although she and my mom remained friends, they haven't seen each other in years, but they're still friends on Facebook. Christy refused to enter that house ever again. Christy had seen the pictures containing the orbs, since there were actually pictures of me and her son together that showed the orbs floating around us. Seeing this man behind the couch was the last straw. She stuck to her word and never returned to the house for the remainder of our time there. It was around this time that my parents began to feel off in the house, especially when spending time in the basement and in my bedroom. My mom would try as hard as she could to avoid spending too much time in the basement. And both of my parents have told me that they felt like they were being watched as they tucked me into bed some nights. And then one day, the activity presented itself while my dad was at work. For a little backstory, not sure if anyone else has experienced this as a child, but
I was absolutely obsessed with these classical music CDs called Baby Einstein. They had these weird puppet creatures that represented different artists and composers, and all of the CDs were narrated by the same woman whose name escapes me now. Anyways, I was in the living room asleep while my mom was in the kitchen cooking. She was playing one of the Baby Einstein CDs over some speakers we had, so I wouldn't wake up and bother her as she cooked. As she's cooking, she starts hearing what sounds like a woman talking over the music. My mom could tell it was not the narrator, since this woman sounded younger and was not talking during one of the pieces. The narrator only came on between the songs. Although my mom couldn't take out exactly what the woman was saying, she described it to me as hearing the woman having a conversation. She sounded happy, and my mom could hear the tone of her voice changing as she talked. At first, my mom thought maybe she was just overhearing someone talking outside, but when she peeked through the blinds to the kitchen window, she saw no one. Thinking maybe it was just coming from somewhere else, she walked out onto the deck, looking out into the forest behind her house. Again, no one. At this point, the woman had stopped talking, and my mom was beginning to be convinced what she was experiencing was something paranormal. After this, the activity around the house came to a head. There was one night my aunt was over with my mom, helping her out around the house while my dad was at work. Another quick bit of backstory, my room was very dark and it was sometimes very hard to hear what was going on up there from downstairs. For this reason, my parents bought a baby monitor to stick in my room so they would know if I was crying or if I wasn't sleeping well. This was long before the days of video monitors, so all this monitor had was a cheap microphone and some red lights that showed how loud the noise in the room was. Also in my room, sitting directly across from my crib, was an old rocking chair that my mom had inherited from her grandma. My aunt and my mom had just put me to sleep, and were sitting downstairs when they started hearing a noise over the baby monitor. At first they couldn't quite make it out, but very quickly realised what they were hearing. It was the sound of the rocking chair, creaking back and forth as if someone was sitting in it. The only person that should have been upstairs at the time was myself, but I was fast asleep. My aunt and my mom were downstairs, and my dad was still at work. The two stood up from their chairs in a panic, but as soon as they stood, the creaking noise stopped suddenly. They walked upstairs and into my room, and found nothing out of the ordinary. I was still fast asleep, and the rocking chair looked as though it had never been disturbed. They walked back downstairs, and as soon as they sat back down, the creaking started again. This cycle of creaking over the baby monitor, walking upstairs to find everything undisturbed, and then sitting back down and hearing the creaking start again, continued for about an hour, and it reached a point where my aunt was convinced we should leave the house and stay in a hotel for the night. Not too long after, my dad came home, and the creaking stopped completely. At this point, my mum was convinced that her and my dad's feelings of discomfort surrounding my bedroom were justified, and began looking for ways to solve the problem. Although my dad remained skeptical, my mum was convinced that what was going on in the house was paranormal, and began trying to find ways to reach out to whatever was in the house. At this point, my mum had accumulated hundreds of pictures containing the orbs, and wanted to see if she could capture something more compelling in a photo. One day, she decided to take the camera and point it at random spots in the house. Before snapping the picture, she said aloud, "Can you give me some sort of sign that you're here?" She snapped the photo, and as she looked down at the screen, she was shocked. In the picture, several separate balls of light appear in the center of the screen, up against the wall, but they appear in a straight horizontal line. She is ecstatic that not only did she capture something more compelling than an orb, she also managed to capture some sort of intelligence from what she was now convinced was a spirit living in our home. She tried asking for more signs, but in the absence of anything else, she began combing through the hundreds of pictures she'd already captured, looking for anything else that could show that these were more than just a trick of the eye or dust particles floating in the air. After a good amount of time searching, she found what she was looking for. A picture of me and Christy's son featuring an orb. But the orb was different. Inside the orb was the outline of what appeared to be some sort of face. She immediately began searching around the internet for paranormal investigators and contacted a team in the area to see if they'd be willing to come and check out the house. The investigators asked her to tell them about the experiences we'd been having, and although they were a little apprehensive, they finally agreed to check things out. Before coming out to investigate, the investigators told her that normally they would not be willing to come check out a house if all the residents had to show for the ghosts were pictures of orbs and personal testimony, but that they were convinced by both the sheer amount of pictures that my mom had and the two very bizarre photos, one featuring the line of orbs and the other featuring the orb with the face. The investigators did come over, albeit slightly skeptical, but they immediately began experiencing strange activity. Almost as soon as the investigators walked upstairs into my bedroom, all of their camera batteries died almost simultaneously. This actually freaked them out, with one of them looking at my dad and saying, "Your house is weird, man." These were all new batteries and they died in 5 minutes. The same thing happened down in the basement, with batteries dying left and right, affecting all sorts of equipment. Microphones and digital recorders picked up strange, staticky feedback, and their electromagnetic field readers picked up odd spikes, both in my bedroom and in the basement. My parents' suspicions about the house had been confirmed by professionals, and the investigators were convinced that there was something off about the house. After reviewing the evidence and doing some deliberating, the investigators told my parents that they wanted to return to the house a second time, this time with more equipment, since they were convinced there was more evidence to be captured. My parents eagerly set up the follow-up and waited. Now this is where this story becomes a little muddy. I do 100% believe my mom, and the fact that my dad, a skeptic, backs her up on a lot of these stories makes it extra compelling to me. But this last part of the story has always left a bad taste in my mouth. My mom was a very spiritual person. She always believed in angels, certain stones carrying supernatural powers and the like. She's a therapist and a hypnotist, so I get it. But I guess what I'm trying to say here is to maybe take this final portion of the story with a grain of salt. Yes, it's odd, but I don't want to make assumptions about what was going on, and neither should you. I wouldn't be telling this story if I wasn't convinced it was real, but this final portion has always seemed a little odd. Anyways, my mum had set up a consultation with a woman claiming to be a psychic medium well before the paranormal investigators came over to visit the house. The appointment was only a week or so before the investigators were scheduled for their follow-up. Anyways, during the appointment, the woman asked my mom about the strange experiences we've been having in the house, and the medium told my mom that she'd picked up on the energy of a man in the house. She said he was lonely, and that he'd latched onto my family since he'd been over on his own. Obviously, this doesn't explain the woman's voices we heard in the house, but whatever. Like I said, this whole thing seemed a little odd to me. The woman asked my mom if she wanted her to either cleanse the house or leave it be. Knowing that the investigators were returning soon, my mom told the woman not to do anything to the house. She wanted to see what could be captured with more advanced equipment. The medium told her she wouldn't, but when my mom returned home afterwards, she noticed the entire house felt different. It felt like a heavy weight had been lifted out of the house atmosphere. She began to suspect that the medium had cleansed the house anyway. Not sure how that's possible, considering the medium never actually visited the house. Maybe someone in the comments can explain how this works. And her suspicions were only confirmed when the investigators returned for the second time and captured absolutely nothing. No strange EMF readings, no cold spots, no electronic malfunctions, nothing. This takes place about 2 years ago in August, in my home, during a bright summer day. So my sister came over to see me and my baby son one afternoon. My son went for a nap, and as we were both a bit drowsy, we also went for naps in separate beds on 2 different floors. Now a bit about my house. It's old. So old we weren't entirely sure how, because if we looked too deeply we might get into one of those naughty blue plaques. My house isn't haunted. It's got residual loving and warm energy, but that's it. Our wooden stairs, we've got 2 sets as my house is set over 3 floors. I joke that these stairs are demon stairs because they are beyond creaky. You cannot sneak, no matter how hard you try. Believe me, with a new baby, I've tried. So my sister slept in my bed and I in the spare bed, on different floors. We're only sleeping for an hour. Partway through the nap, I woke to hear someone on the stairs. I assumed it was my sister leaving to go to work, but chose to go back to sleep. Once I woke up, I checked on my sister, only to find her still in bed. I asked her if she had gone downstairs. She said she hadn't moved, but heard the stairs and thought it was me. So now both of us heard the stairs. I figured maybe it was my father-in-law who pops in sometimes. Check in with him. Nope, he was working all day. Checked with other family members who lived nearby. Everyone was out. It's not settling sounds, and it has never done it before or since. So who was on the stairs? Rather sadly, this coincided with the death of my aunt, my sister and I loved. She'd only visited the house a couple of times, but part of me wonders if it was her. This happened when I was 9 years old. At that age, I never really believed in paranormal stuff, even though my mum had told me stories of paranormal stuff she'd experienced. But since I hadn't experienced any of that yet, I never took her stories too seriously. Anyways, I remember I was waiting for my mom to pick me up from school, and I was sitting next to this girl from my class, and she told me that there was a ghost in our classroom, and the ghost would sit in desks and run around. Obviously, I didn't really take it too seriously, but I told her I would check it out. The next day, again after school, they would make us sit in the hallways for kids who were getting picked up, and I remember my teacher leaving the classroom with his things and locking up in the classroom. I decided since no one was there anymore, it would be the perfect opportunity to see if there really was a ghost. The classroom door had a small window, and walking up to it, I wasn't expecting anything until I looked through the window. I saw a girl, probably about my age, sitting at a desk and was wearing a dress. It was red, white and black. She had very long hair and very pale skin, almost transparent, but she seemed like she was glowing. I remember being incredibly confused rather than scared, so I went to the water fountain to drink some water. Then I walked back and looked again, and she was still there. I was still confused, and then her head was slowly turning towards me. I could see her face. I walked away. I wasn't ever scared until now. I'm still in disbelief that it happened. I told my parents, and my dad didn't really believe it. Years later, I tried to do research but couldn't find anything on the girl. I still remain confused to this day. I'm a 20-year-old female. The first time I remember seeing someone who wasn't there, I was 6 years old. After these instances kept happening, my grandparents eventually fessed up and said she's been doing this since she was little. They told my parents how I'd see people on the boardwalk and ask to walk with them, or play with people in the ocean that weren't there. As I got older, they became constant, and I was able to tell who was real and what wasn't. My dad died when I was 12, but up until the day he died, I made him sleep back to back with me until I fell asleep, and also walk behind me up the stairs because I always had this feeling on my back like someone was with me. Eventually, when I was around 9, I went to therapy for unresolved trauma. Happened at around 4 years old. My dad was all for therapy, but he made it very clear that I wasn't allowed to tell the therapist what I was seeing or feeling because they'd take me away. Fast forward to me being 14 and hospitalized with anorexia. The psychiatrist that was treating me knew something was up, and my mom went against my deceased father's wishes and told the doctor what I've been going through. I was put on Zyprexa, which I was on for 6 years at high doses, but the visions and the presence never really went away. I just finished withdrawal from Zyprexa. My therapist, psychiatrist, doctors and my mom say it's just access to the spirit world that I'll always have. I've been screened for schizophrenia, psychosis, schizoid, all of it. They can't find anything but depression, anxiety, PTSD and anorexia. Nothing that explains what I experience. When I was younger, I was much more close to this entity that I will refer to as Victor, though I commonly call him Vincitor as well. If you look at the definition of that, it might be relevant. I'll make the explanation for this existence short, unless any of you would like to hear the full story eventually. But he's been actively stalking me and seemingly my ancestors for a long time. He's the pay for your sins of your father type. Now you might be saying pay for the sins of your father type. He's a negative spirit, no doubt about that, but over the years he developed a strange kinship for me, going so far as to referring to me as his daughter. Now believe me, I like considering everything and all the facts, so I've gone back and forth on being more sure of him even existing and not. Sometimes I feel crazy. What always gets me back to the believing anything is possible spectrum is when I think about all the strange occurrences that so far cannot be explained by mental illness or coincidence. The story I have to tell is now one of those many occurrences. I had been talking to Victor in the way we usually spoke. He'd move objects right, left, up and down to signal what he was saying in reply. This wasn't a board, it was just random objects. I'd heard his voice before, but he didn't talk as much. He was saying, or I guess more so agreeing since his talking is limited, that he felt weak and that's why he was moving things slower. I got the strangest idea right then and there, and probably an incredibly stupid idea as well. Unfortunately, even though I knew it was stupid, I didn't care. I knew it would only come back to haunt me, literally, and didn't care about myself enough to avoid making it worse than it already was. My idea was maybe there was energy he could feed off, the power in my power bank. It had been fully charged, so I grabbed it and put it on my table, and I said to him, okay, take the power from this power bank. And I watched it with my own eyes drain completely. I was so surprised. I just never thought that anything like that would have happened. Sure, I asked for it, but even part of me sure wasn't if it was possible. Still wasn't sure that I wasn't just crazy even after everything. I continued in the exact same manner as before, 2 times that day, and he again drained it completely. After the 3rd one, I stopped charging it or saying he could take it. To me, that was enough to show it was happening. I ran a bunch of tests to see how it looked when it wasn't charged, or when it was charged and was charging something else being an actual electronic. And it looked exactly what it looked like when charging something except around 10 times faster. Now, I've heard of paranormal entities feeding off electricity or things of that nature, but obviously more commonly people think that it's emotions and that the power comes from the emotions. What are your opinions on what paranormal entities feed off? I've had weird occurrences happen to me for years, some that can be explained, others not. I believe I've suffered from sleep paralysis, which could explain a couple of my experiences, but not all of them. So I'm going to skim over some of my easier explained experiences and cut out the one experience I can't explain as well. One of the times I saw my demon, he refers to himself as Victor, clear as day, was extremely terrifying. I was walking around my room in the middle of the day listening to music on my Xbox with a headset on. This is relevant to the story. Usually when I listen to music, it's for inspiration, and I usually pace. In this case, I was pacing in a circle. For reference, my desk right in front of the window was opposite to the door, so when I went in circles, I'd spend some time looking at the door, then turn around and look at my desk and so on. Well, I'd been repeating this for a while. I was on the part where I was looking at the door, and all of a sudden I felt this overwhelming feeling that something was there behind me watching. I thought to myself, I'm just being paranoid, it's probably nothing. We should turn around slowly in case something is there. It might sound weird, but in my mind, I felt if something was there, it would be easier to ignore if I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, rather than staring at it immediately in the face. So, I slowly started to turn around, and there he was, crouched on my desk in the middle of the day. I literally fell on my arse. I don't know how long we were staring at each other. Sometimes it feels like it could have been hours. I was paralyzed with fear. He didn't say anything, he just moved in this weird manner, still in place, smiling, something that to this day I remember as being so disturbing, more disturbing than heinous things I've seen because of the way it made me feel. Eventually I got my wits about me. I scrambled to my feet, throwing my Xbox controller at him as a way to hopefully slow him down. If he was to follow me, I got to my door and ran down the hallway towards my grandmother. I told her that I was back and I had just seen it clear as day. She came in with me. Nothing was there, just my controller on the floor with a song playing. One that wasn't on my playlist. A song that shouldn't normally be taken as disturbing, but in this case, it was. Funny enough, it was a song to a Disney Channel original movie, Girl vs. Monster, specifically Fearless. I know it's funny, but still it kinda gives me the creeps that I walked in on the part, I'm stuck in your head and I'm back from the dead, got you running and scared. Weird coincidence, right? I suppose you all should know some information pertaining to this entity. He's pretending to be my father, he calls me daughter, and that's something that makes the situation even worse, as they made it more personal, especially considering who he was. A couple of years ago, my girlfriend and I were driving back to my house, and it was around 9 or 10 at night and dark. As we drove along, I turned right to go up a straight road on a hill. This particular road isn't in the middle of nowhere. In the surrounding area are houses, etc. But on the right hand side of it is a small park of sorts, and to the left is a pavement with a bus stop, an embankment, so there were no houses right next to that, if it makes sense. Anyways, this night was foggy, and as I turned onto this road, it dips then goes up the hill. As I was about to go down the dip, my headlights shone across the fog and I very clearly saw a figure walking from left to right across the road. Except there's no bottom half, and it appears to be wearing clothes that resemble a livery coat and hat, like Captain Jack Sparrow. Basically clothing that I guess are Victorian or older. Not an expert, sorry. This happens in a span of I'd say 2 or 3 seconds, before the figure vanishes into thin air. It didn't disappear into the fog, as I could see both sides of the road. The figure simply vanished. Since my girlfriend was in the car, I didn't want to freak her out or sound insane, so in that 2 to 3 seconds I said nothing. She immediately said, "Did you see that?" I was immediately relieved I wasn't going insane, and we both agreed we'd seen the exact same thing. When we arrived home shortly after, I got out a pen and paper and asked her to draw what she's seen in a separate room, while I drew what I seen. Both images were remarkably similar, if you can forgive our poor drawing skills. I have the images saved to my phone, happy to upload them if anyone is interested. Anyway, I'm neither a believer or a skeptic. I enjoy stories and approach them with an open mind. There could well be a logical explanation for mine, but so far it's the only paranormal experience I've had yet. My girlfriend and I have also shared dreams from different rooms, so maybe we're on the same wavelength. So anyway, I wanted to run this dream I had past you guys. I know it's probably just a normal dream, but after everything I've read and the experience my mom told me about in the past, I'd kind of like to hear, that it's something. My dad died of cancer when I was 10. A few months back, I had a really vivid dream that I was with him, walking around a seaside town near where we lived. I don't remember much, only that I could feel his presence, that it felt really comforting, and he told me he was really proud of me. I always never have dreams about him, so it was really special to me. We have very similar careers and interests, and I found a fair bit of success, so I've always hoped he would be proud. It went a bit more regular dream weirdness after that. There was a random cathedral plonked down in the middle of the town that we went inside. Although it makes sense because he loved cathedrals, and he would always go on day trips to visit them. I don't know, I'm waffling now. So, what do you reckon? Any chance my dad really visited me?